2016 was an interesting year for television. In an era where the medium was very much transforming and slowly entering a new age, there was a lot happening. Just in general, the landscape looked quite different. Game of Thrones still had everyone in a chokehold, The Walking Dead was still considered a good show at the time and was actually the most watched TV series in the world. Superhero shows were dominating the culture, coming off the peak of popularity of the Arrowverse, and right after the first season of the universally acclaimed Daredevil. But 2016 was mostly an interesting year because it seemed to be the time where studios and networks started to be more open to the idea of producing weird shows, to embrace not-so-conventional ideas, and that allowed us to have some incredibly unique shows that all came out that same year. Fleabag, The Night Of, Channel Zero, The OA, Atlanta, The Good Place, Insecure. Like, it was a good time to be a TV fanatic. We were eating good in 2016, but among all the gems this special year of television gave us, one of them in particular would stand out and truly put its stamp on pop culture. On July 15, 2016, Netflix, who had already had a great year by that point, released a new series to its catalog. A series that they hadn't marketed that much and that they didn't seem to believe was going to do anything all that serious. It was a fairly small project that had flown under everyone's radars and that didn't muster up any hype, even when the trailers were released, but a project that, against all odds, took over the world in record time and became the biggest show in the platform's history, to the point where it has sort of become its flagship series that everybody now considers the face of the company. And today, we are going to talk about this show, a show that is very important to me. We are going to talk about Stranger Things. Yep. This is it, guys. This is the one you've been waiting for. And for good reason. I first announced I was making this video on Instagram 2 years ago. And it took me this much time to feel like I could finally say everything I wanted to say. Because there is a lot to say about this show. More than I initially anticipated. So yes, this video has been a long time coming. Sorry for taking this long, but it was important for me to do it right because this show has a special place in my heart and I have a lot of opinions. So, where do we start? Okay, first I need to sort of establish where I stand with the series. There has been ample time for feelings to develop and change because, yeah, despite the fact that it only has 4 seasons, Stranger Things has been around for almost a decade now. It came out 8 years ago and it has only gotten bigger with each passing day. I think it would be accurate to say that I have developed a bit of a love-hate relationship with Stranger Things. This show has a habit of leaving me feeling quite conflicted about it, and it's been trotting in my head for a while now because we've been used to having to wait like 3 years in between seasons. Season 1 came out in 2016, Season 2 came out the following year in 2017, Season 3 came out 2 years after that in 2019, and then we waited 3 years for Season 4, which came out in 2022. And by the time Season 5 comes out next year, it will have been another 3 years. So needless to say, I've had time to really refine my stance on Stranger Things, especially as it has evolved over the years. To make a long story short, I think I've never been more resentful of a show becoming successful, which makes me feel weird because despite the fact that I think everybody should watch and experience Stranger Things, I also absolutely hate what success has done to Stranger Things. I loathe the way its popularity transformed it. Stranger Things is a special show. I think we can all agree to that to some degree. There isn't another one like it out there, and it's a pop culture phenomenon that 100% deserves its status of TV icon, but it's also a show that has fallen victim to that very same iconography, and it has led it to a very frustrating decline where some of its biggest strengths weirdly became its most glaring weaknesses. And that shift in the show's quality is something I have been thinking about a lot. But first, some context. So, for the uninitiated, Stranger Things is the story of a group of people who live in a small town named Hawkins in the state of Indiana in 1983. Hawkins is a town that is seemingly ordinary and quite boring. Nothing ever really happens in Hawkins. It's your typical suburban little community in the middle of nowhere. However, the lives of the people in this town are completely transformed when, one night, a young boy named Will Byers, who is biking home after spending the day at his best friend's house, suddenly goes missing under strange circumstances. Just like that, he vanishes without a trace. The entire town mobilizes to organize a search party, but Will's mother, Joyce, begins to believe that something more might be happening in Hawkins. Something unexplainable that might have gotten to her son. Something that may be breaching the realm of the supernatural. And meanwhile, on the same night, in another part of town, a mysterious little girl of unknown origins suddenly appears, alone, scared, and looking for help. Stranger Things was created by the Duffer Brothers, two twins who had not really made anything of note beforehand, aside maybe from a very small post-apocalyptic zombie flick named Hidden with Alexander Skarsgård. I haven't seen it, so I don't know if it's any good, but long story short, they were relatively unknown until they made Stranger Things. Initially titled Montauk, the show was pitched to a number of networks and studios by the brothers, but every single one of them turned it down. Nobody was interested in this thing, except for Netflix, who decided to pick up the project and give it a shot. The show was directed by the Duffers themselves and Shawn Levy. Yes, the director of Deadpool and Wolverine directed 8 episodes of Stranger Things. In fact, he's the only person to have directed episodes of season 1 aside from the Duffers themselves. He recently explained in an interview that he stepped in to direct episodes 3 and 4 so the twins could have time to finish writing the season, and since then it's become a tradition for him to direct the 3rd and 4th episodes of each season. Past season 1 though, the twins found other directors to take on some of the episodes, but the Duffers themselves traditionally direct the first 2 episodes and the final 2 episodes of each season. The show takes a lot of inspiration from 1980s media, mostly Stephen King novels and Steven Spielberg movies. They're very good at using these influences and paying homage to those stories while furthering their own creation without it feeling like empty nostalgia bait. And that makes the show feel nostalgic more because of its vibe than because of its callbacks. But what a lot of people don't know is that the initial inspiration for Stranger Things isn't a movie from the 80s. It's actually a movie from 2013 called Prisoners, a movie directed by Denis Villeneuve, the director of Dune, Arrival, and Blade Runner 2049. Prisoners is a really sinister movie about a man named Keller, played by Hugh Jackman, who has to face his own worst nightmare when his 6-year-old daughter and her friend go missing, and when the investigation kinda stalls, he decides to take matters into his own hands. The Duffer Brothers saw this movie and were really inspired to explore the dynamic around a parent looking for their missing child, but in a TV format, and that's how the idea of Stranger Things was born. The reason why it was initially titled Montauk is because the first version of the show was taking place in Montauk, New York, a real town that is tied to a number of conspiracy theories around the US government's activity around psychological warfare. But eventually, after being turned down by a number of networks, they reworked the show and decided to take it out of that location, choosing instead to create the fictional town of Hawkins, Indiana. So they had to change the title, and taking inspiration from their hero Stephen King, they opted for the title Stranger Things, as a nod to King's 1991 novel Needful Things. Upon its release in 2016, Stranger Things became an overnight sensation, an instant worldwide mega hit that seemingly came out of nowhere and that caught everybody off guard, including Netflix and the Duffer Brothers. Nobody expected it to become this big, and certainly not this fast. But it did, and for good reason. The show can be applauded for many of its features. Its impeccable aesthetics, great directing, incredible writing, extremely charismatic and lovable characters, and the unsung heroes of many great shows and movies, the editors, who do not get enough credit for how insane their work is throughout the entire show. Dean Zimmerman, Catherine Naranjo, Kevin D. Ross, and Nat Fuller truly gave the show a signature editing style that heavily contributes to its overall vibe. Stranger Things is impeccably well edited, and that's worth mentioning because bad editing can be very distracting at times. But to me, the real heroes of Stranger Things are Kyle Dixon and Michael Stein, the composers of the show. These two really snapped when it comes to making music for the show. They haven't missed a single time. The music of Stranger Things is nothing short of legendary at this point. It is one of its signature features. It's incredibly atmospheric. It wakes your sense of nostalgia. It's epic and beautiful, and honestly, it's probably the greatest contributor to Stranger Things having the very unique feeling it has as a show.
Hey! I didn't say go! Get back here! I'm gonna kill you!
In fact, I'll let you in on a little secret about me. As a lot of you guys know, I make music. I've been making music for like 17 years, and when I was a teenager, around 15 or 16 years old, I was a big fan of the Castor Chronicles, a series of novels written by Kami Garcia and Margaret Stoll. So, my 16-year-old ass took it upon himself back in 2011 to compose an entire soundtrack for the books. And my guy, I was a fucking visionary. Yeah, you heard that right. I was a precursor. My single greatest flex is that I was composing Stranger Things music 5 years before Stranger Things even came out. I am nothing if not a trendsetter. You're fucking welcome, by the way. But my 16-year-old compositions aside, yes, the music of Stranger Things is by far one of its greatest strengths. So many of the songs in this show have become iconic in their own right, and deservedly so. It's like this show was made for me. It has everything I love, and on paper, it should have remained this amazing little thing. But it didn't. And that's because of the unfortunate reality that Stranger Things is a show that has continued to exist just for the sake of continuing to exist. And the longer the show has gone, the more difficult it has become to ignore that. The show has morphed into something bizarre, this sort of heavily Hollywoodized version of itself. And I think it's worth talking about. I might get some flack for some things I'm gonna say in this video because Stranger Things has a very dedicated fandom, which is great. I am a fan of the show, but I also am a great believer in being able to criticize the things you love, which is difficult with the current state of stan culture, which heavily operates with the principle that being a true fan of something means you can never say anything bad about it. And as such, a lot of people who really like this show don't like to admit that when you really take a deeper look at it, Stranger Things is kind of a mess now, and there are very specific reasons why it has become a mess, and we are gonna talk about that. But the music still rips though, no complaints there. And believe me, I will be blasting those tunes even more now that I'm equipped with today's sponsor, Raycon, because I want this music in my veins. Look, I don't even need to introduce Raycon. You guys already know these everyday earbuds are the top of the game. And even more now because their new sick models with active ergonomic design include some pretty sweet new features, like its active noise cancellation, which is just perfect for traveling. We all know what it's like on an airplane or a busy train, as well as the quick charge feature, multi-point connectivity, and all of the other perks you've come to know and expect from Raycon. They're efficient, powerful, the audio quality is top-notch, and they're incredibly comfortable thanks to their different sized gel tips that allow you to find the perfect fit for your ears. Gotta say, that's been kind of a lifesaver for me because I have pretty small ears and it's been a nightmare my entire life to find earbuds earbuds that fit me and that don't fall off every 15 seconds, so this is pretty neat. I can go on a run with them or lie down however I want. These bad boys stay in and they're always comfy. So they're easily my go-to choice every single day. And if that's not enough, they also come in a new protective case and in a bunch of different colors to perfectly reflect your style. What more could you ask for, my dude? And you know what? You guys are in luck, because Raycon is hooking you up. Right now, if you go and click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/Space Ninja, you will get 20 to 40% off your Raycon purchase. 20 to 40%, that's crazy. So remember, click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/Space Ninja. Thank you so much to Raycon for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to the show. Season 1 of Stranger Things is one of my favorite single seasons of television of all time. I think it is basically perfect TV. It is what I could only describe as lightning in a bottle, an expertly crafted combination of so many elements that it almost feels like witchcraft. This is truly an example of taking an idea with potential and unlocking 110% of it. Everything hits, every piece falls into place with precision. The most impressive thing about the show right off the bat is its cast, which is almost unfairly talented. The acting in this show is fucking crazy, which is wild because a good half of the cast is composed of children, and the story heavily relies on those children. That can be very risky, but whoever was in charge of casting them deserves an award because holy shit, every single kid in this show is just amazing. It's also a masterclass in pacing. The story flows flawlessly. No plot ever feels like it's taking too long, and nothing ever feels like it's being rushed. There is a balance there that is just remarkably handled. The Duffers take great advantage of the Netflix binge model by making the plot progress in a way that makes the season feel less like an episodic TV show and more like an 8-hour movie. And the way they strike that perfect harmony is kind of crazy because this show has a lot of characters, and I mean a lot. But despite the fact that it has a very large cast of characters, they all feel like they individually have an adequate time to get complete arcs and natural character development. It does an insanely effective job at introducing everyone from the protagonists, the adults, the teenagers, the kids, the number of dynamics playing out between all of them, and the antagonists, the scientists, and the monster thing. The season follows 3 main storylines that act as 3 pieces of the same puzzle. You have the kids who discover the existence of Eleven, the mysterious little girl with strange powers. You have the teenagers trying to find an explanation for another person going missing in an unexplainable way. And then you have the adults who are trying to find Will. All 3 storylines begin with a very simple intrigue that slowly starts to breach the realm of the supernatural, which starts creating more and more problems. It becomes clear after a while that every single plot is leading to the same inevitable conclusion, and so they converge into one large story at the end that sees all the characters unite and piece the puzzle together once they get to share what each of them got to learn about the situation on their own separate investigations. And it works because even if the show introduces a lot of lore, the main goal of the story remains very grounded. And I think that is one of the show's biggest strengths. Despite its weird concepts and supernatural/sci-fi elements, I think season 1 of Stranger Things works this well because at its core, it's really just a story about a bunch of people in a small town trying to find a kid that went missing. It's not about saving the world, countering the Soviet Union, or massive blockbuster battles. Stranger Things 1 is a very small and intimate story, and it is dedicated to sustain that grounded foundation. But most of all, it works because it's simple. It's just people dealing with the unexplainable disappearance of a child. Yes, there is a conspiracy and a whole supernatural element to it that is there to enhance the story, but it is only here to support a very simple plot, and it works really well because, by default, the supernatural element that enhances the mystery is well, mysterious. All of the concepts that are introduced in this season are here for two reasons: to intensify the mystery and to create an atmosphere. That is probably the most important word to Stranger Things Season 1. Atmosphere. The Duffer Brothers put an insane amount of effort in having the show feel nostalgic and eerie. They want to scare you, but not with insane amounts of gore and jump scares. They scare you with atmosphere, with a tone that feels uneasy. And because the plot revolves around something enigmatic and obscure, you don't really know what to expect, and the Duffers take advantage of that. They craft this world by using the fear of the unknown, which is very much what Stranger Things is about. The fear of the unknown in a horror sense, but also in a human sense. It's about kids turning into teenagers, teenagers turning into adults, and a bunch of adults who are losing grasp on everything in their lives. The music, again, contributes a whole lot to this sense of atmosphere. Dixon and Stein are masters at conveying emotion through their compositions. One minute you feel incredibly nostalgic for memories you've never had, and the next you feel uneasy and on edge. But as directors, the Duffers also know that sometimes creating the scariest scene is by using silence. They perfectly nail their choices to not have music in certain scenes, to make them feel more uncomfortable. As audiences, we're used to music setting the tone of a scene, so they counter-signal that by setting up a creepy sequence in complete silence, which greatly adds to the show's sinister atmosphere. You get it, the Duffers use every weapon in their arsenal to unlock the show's potential, but they succeed at it by keeping the story simple. The setup of the season is very straightforward. You're introduced to the main kids, Mike, Dustin, Lucas, and Will, as they play a game of Dungeons and Dragons in Mike's basement. Mike's mom puts an end to the game because it's getting late, the boys disband, and Will hops on his bike and makes his way home. But after riding for a while, the light on his bike starts malfunctioning, and in his distraction, Will is suddenly startled by something strange standing in the middle of the road. He falls off his bike, but as he tries to get himself up, he realizes that whatever was standing in the road, whoever it was or whatever it was, it's following him. So Will gets scared, he abandons his bike, and he runs through the woods to get to his house. He eventually does get there, and he locks the door behind him, but nobody's home. Not his mom, not his brother. Will is alone, and he starts to panic. He figures his mom is still at work, so he tries to call her on the phone, but the phone starts malfunctioning as well, and he can hear a weird growl on the other end. Will is now terrorized, and at that exact moment, whatever was following him has reached his house. Will runs into his backyard to reach the shed, where he can grab a shotgun to defend himself, because it's America, everybody has a shotgun in the backyard. He gets the shotgun ready, aims it at the shed's door, and waits, but a noise freezes him, and he realizes with horror that the entity is already inside of the shed with him. We see Will looking horrified and powerless. We then zoom in on the shed's light as it turns on by itself, getting brighter and brighter until silence. Will is gone. Just like that. This is the very beginning of the show. This takes place in about 6 minutes. Will has vanished, and now we introduce the large circle of people around him that are gonna be the main characters of the show. Will's mother, Joyce, brilliantly played by Winona Ryder, is a single mom trying her hardest to take care of her 2 boys. She works a lot in order to provide for them, and often relies on her oldest son to help take care of Will. She's naturally in complete shambles when Will vanishes. Joyce had come home very late from work that night and assumed everyone was asleep, so she only realizes Will is not home the next morning. The thought that he has been out there all night mortifies her, so completely panicked, she goes to the police immediately to try and start a search party. But the police doesn't really share her sense of urgency. They live in a small town where nothing ever really happens, so nobody actually believes something serious happened to Will, and they think he's gonna reappear soon and it'll all be a funny memory to talk about at Thanksgiving.
He's a sensitive kid.
Is he?
He's missing.
Joyce, 99 out of 100 times kid goes missing, the kid is with a parent or a relative.
Joyce is scared for her son, and her fear turns into anger and determination, especially the more she sees how powerless the police is when it comes to finding Will after several days. She's relentless in trying to find her son, and she's ready to follow any lead to get him back, which is why when things take a strange turn and it looks like the vanishing of Will might be tied to something supernatural, Joyce does not hesitate to go down that road, even if everybody around her thinks she's losing her sanity. It's a big theme of Joyce's character throughout the entire show. Her erratic behavior tends to make people see her as a bit of a weirdo, so they judge her, and when she speaks, people don't really listen to Joyce, and often treat her like she's a crazy woman who just spouts out a whole lot of nonsense. But as the story progresses, we quickly come to learn that Joyce's intuition is almost always right. She has very powerful instincts, and she has a way of sensing when something is probably more than what it appears to be on the surface, and her determination to find her son allows her to breach the very notion of reality as she knows it. Will's older brother, Jonathan, a socially awkward teenager, is filled with guilt. Jonathan was supposed to be home when his brother came back in that first scene, but he wasn't because he impulsively decided to take an extra late-night shift at work, despite his mother telling him not to do so when she's already working late because that would leave Will home alone. Jonathan feels like he failed to protect his little brother, that his disappearance was his fault, and that he maybe could have helped him and kept him safe if he hadn't disobeyed Joyce. He feels lost and powerless. He doesn't have any friends, and just like his mother, his peers think he's a bit of a weirdo because he's awkward and solitary, so he doesn't really have anyone to turn to for comfort. Losing his brother is a very lonely pain. Jonathan eventually finds a path forward when he accidentally takes a photograph of something that doesn't look very human, a sort of humanoid creature that we later know as the Demogorgon. He teams up with a girl from school named Nancy, the older sister of one of Will's friends. Nancy is dealing with her own sense of guilt after going to a party with her best friend Barb and abandoning her to go hook up with a jock named Steve. While she was gone, Barb waited for her outside alone, and just like Will a couple days prior, she mysteriously disappeared as well. So Nancy and Jonathan bond through their guilt, and when they understand a strange creature might be lurking in Hawkins, they decide to run their own investigation to try and save their missing loved ones. And then we are introduced to Jim Hopper, played by David Harbour. Hopper is the chief of police in Hawkins, and a shell of a man who is dealing, or rather avoiding to deal, with the death of his young daughter, who passed away after a battle with cancer 5 years prior. Hopper is now divorced, lonely, clearly depressed, and completely disconnected from his own existence. His ex-wife managed to move on with her life. She eventually remarried and had another child, but Hopper was unable to do the same. Losing his daughter broke him beyond recognition. Motivation is something that no longer exists in his life. He has no patience for anyone or anything. He's closed off, irritable, emotionally bankrupt, and his existence outside of work mainly consists of drinking himself to sleep and enduring the hangover during his next shift. When Joyce comes to him to tell him Will is missing, Hopper doesn't take it seriously. He thinks Will might have just run away to his deadbeat dad or to some other relative, and he's almost annoyed that he has to do something about it. He sees this as a waste of time and an inconvenience, but the longer Will's disappearance persists, the more the cop in Hopper starts to wake up, and he begins to treat the case as a serious matter. Slowly, Hopper is brought back by a new sense of purpose to save a child's life, and you realize he's actually a good man and a really good cop when he's trying. Like Joyce, he also becomes relentless in his investigation, and he genuinely wants to solve this case and find the boy. While he first refuses to follow Joyce's gut feeling about Will's fate being some sort of supernatural occurrence, Hopper is later forced to face the reality that she might be right. Through his investigation, he's confronted to the horrifying truth that not only Will did in fact disappear without a trace in a way that cannot be rationally explained, but that someone in Hawkins is actively trying to cover it up. This incident is bigger than anything Hopper could have imagined. Meanwhile, Will's best friends, the 3 other kids we met at the beginning, decide to run their own investigation to find their homeboy. Mike is a smart kid with an attitude. He is sort of the main kid of the show for the first season. Lucas is also a smart kid, a bit more righteous than the others. He doesn't like to break rules, and he's the one who butts heads with the gang the most frequently. And then there's Dustin, the goofy but resourceful super nerd who turns everything into a joke and has a heart of gold. All 3 boys directly disobey orders from Hopper, who tells them to go straight home after school and stay there to be safe. But they decide to sneak out at night and look for Will. They venture into the woods in the dark, and that's where they find 11, the first big piece of the puzzle. 11 is the little girl who appears in Hawkins right around the time Will goes missing, seemingly out of nowhere. She's clearly not from here. She seems lost and confused. She's strange. She's dressed in a dirty hospital gown. Her head is shaved. She doesn't seem to know how to speak, and she has a strange tattoo of the number 11 on her wrist. And from what she tries to communicate, it seems like 11 is her name. We don't really understand what's going on with her, but it's very clear that she is running from someone. People are after 11. It looks like she escaped from somewhere, and whoever she ran away from is willing to kill innocent people to get their hands on her. Probably because, as we discover very early on, 11 appears to have psychic powers. She can move things with her mind, and it's later explained that she was essentially raised in a lab where an evil doctor named Brenner did some experiments on her. And there you have your 3 big plot lines. Plotline 1, the adults are looking for Will and slowly realize he might still be in Hawkins, but somehow trapped in an alternate version of it. Plotline 2, the teenagers are looking for Will and they discover there is a strange monster lurking around Hawkins. And plotline 3, the kids are looking for Will, and they discover the existence of a little girl with superpowers who has mercenaries after her. And then the show works really hard to tell you how these 3 bizarre storylines are connected. These elements all play together perfectly, using the right characters together and giving them all great arcs that carry through the season. We're eventually introduced to the Upside Down, the mirror dimension parallel to Hawkins, the Demogorgon, the scary creature from the Upside Down that somehow found itself inside of our world, and we get to see the characters go against those foes in an effort to get the boy back. The story is super well thought out and full of incredibly clever nods to 80s media, from E.T., The Goonies, Poltergeist, Akira, and of course, Alien. It never falters in its execution, and that's because the show realizes how crucial and precious its sense of mystery is, and it preserves it from beginning to end. The show doesn't feel the need to explain to you everything the Upside Down is and how it works, because it's not what's important about this story. And if you ask me, keeping the mystery around it makes the Upside Down cooler. It's what makes the show so eerie. I love that by the end of season 1, Will is saved, but you still don't get a full explanation about what the Upside Down is. It ends the story by having the disappearance solved, but with this lingering, creepy feeling, because you just witness how these normal-ass people in this normal-ass town accidentally came across another dimension that is way too abstract for any of us to comprehend. You learn that 11 accidentally opened a breach to the Upside Down after an experiment going too far, but that's about it. The rest is shrouded in mystery. The Demogorgon is a fantastic threat that remains unexplained as this otherworldly creature that managed to breach dimensions and fall into this random little town. You don't know what it is, but you don't need to. That's not the point. And the end of the story is just perfectly handled. The evil doctor is killed by the Demogorgon. 11 sacrifices herself to kill the Demogorgon. It's emotional. Hopper finally understands that Joyce was right all along. He finds a way into the Upside Down and saves Will, R.I.P. Barb. And globally, every main storyline of the plot is resolved quite effectively. It works, and it's not because you're not answering any questions. It's because the important part of the mystery, Will's disappearance, is solved. They get him back, they save the day, so you feel satisfied with season 1's ending without compromising the mystery behind its lore. The season ends with a sort of happily ever after that takes a turn at the last second when it's revealed that Will might still be connected to the Upside Down in some way. It's like this dark little switcheroo at the end of every horror story. It's such a good ending note that makes the story feel like an episode of The Twilight Zone, or like the end of Michael Jackson's Thriller, where he tells his girlfriend it was all just a dream and then he turns to the camera with evil eyes. It's classic 80s horror, a perfect ending, 10 out of 10, no notes. And it should have been the end of the show. And that's not me making a suggestion, by the way, that's just a fact. If you don't know, Stranger Things was initially designed to be a limited series. The Duffer Brothers had only intended to make one season of that story. This ending was meant to be definitive. They were open to continuing the show as an anthology, where every season would be a new story taking place in a different decade, but Netflix pushed to renew the show for a second season that would continue the story of Eleven and her friends. And that is the downfall of the instant iconography of the characters. The show became a hit, so now we have to continue it, right? So we need a next chapter and we need to expand the lore, but by expanding the lore, you're ruining the lore because it loses its sense of mystery. Because yeah, the issue with Stranger Things is that one, it's a show that increasingly feels the need to over-explain every aspect of its universe to the point where there is no mystery left to be had, and two, it mainly does that by answering this impulsive need to constantly escalate. Stranger Things falls into this very toxic narrative philosophy that in order to get better, it constantly needs to get bigger. And I don't think there is a better example than this show to demonstrate how not true that is. In my opinion, one of the biggest reasons why Stranger Things has gotten worse over time is because it always tries to be bigger as it goes, and it completely destroys one of its biggest assets, its small and intimate story. Season 5 recently had a behind-the-scenes teaser release where the actors are talking about how it's gonna be their biggest season yet, and like, I don't feel excited about that. Stranger Things is a show that was completely overwhelmed and taken off guard by its own overnight success. It instantly became iconic, and you can tell the show is now way too aware of the fact that it is iconic. So now this story has to continue, way past its initial concept that was perfectly executed. Supposedly, that's when the Duffer Brothers came up with a 5-season plan for the show. At least, that's what they say. Now, I know for a fact that that's not true, but I can't tell you why I know that, so let's just pretend that's something I don't know. If season 1 had been it, if this truly turned out to be a limited series, I think I would confidently call Stranger Things the best miniseries of all time. It is that good to me. I hold it very near and dear to my heart. Stranger Things 1 is perfect from beginning to end, and I think everyone should experience it. But alas, it is not a limited series. Stranger Things 2 is really weird. Look, we already established that season 1 is unbeatable to me, okay? And yes, I think that's where the show should have ended. I've said it, and I will say it again many times in this video. But here's the thing. If Stranger Things needed to have a continuation, it didn't, but if it needed to have a continuation, Stranger Things 2, in my opinion, is an acceptable sequel. I don't think it's great, but it's not bad. All things considered, it does feel like a somewhat natural continuation to the story and its concept. But this is also where the cracks start to show. This is where a few issues with the series begin to be introduced, and they will only get worse with time. Stranger Things 2 picks up almost exactly a year after the events of Season 1. Season 1 begins on November 6th of 1983, and Season 2 picks up on Halloween of 1984. We catch up with all the characters who sort of went back to living a normal, mundane life, but before long, the Upside Down inevitably catches up to them, because a terrifying shadow monster from the other dimension takes over the mind of Will Byers. Eleven, who had sacrificed herself to save her friends from the Demogorgon, actually didn't die. She's completely fine. She just crossed over to the Upside Down and found a portal back a few minutes later. But she can't just go back to Mike because the feds are still looking for her. So she lives in the woods for a while until Hopper finds her and takes her to a secret cabin that belonged to his grandfather. And so Eleven lives in hiding with Hopper for an entire year. But nobody knows she's back. Hopper keeps keeps it a secret from everybody to protect her, so the kids have no idea she's around. I think they think she's dead. Eleven spends most of the season on her own solo side quest to find out more about her origins. Season 2 tries to get bigger, but in a reasonable way, so to speak. A lot of people don't like Season 2 that much, but in terms of tone, of narrative, and most of all in terms of character writing, Season 2 is the one that is most consistent with Season 1. Again, it's not perfect, it's good. Not great, but good. There are some awkward narrative choices, like I do think keeping Eleven separated from the rest of the cast all season impacts her character narratively. She just doesn't work as much when she doesn't have any of them to interact with. Her storyline takes forever to get to the point, and that's mainly because if she joins the main cast too fast, then the conflict would be resolved too quickly. It wouldn't be a fair fight. We have a new antagonist this time around, the Mind Flayer, this big giant shadow spider that is meant to expand on the lore of the Upside Down. On paper, I really like the Mind Flayer, but in practice, a lot about the Mind Flayer don't really make no sense. We learned that the Demogorgon the characters faced in Season 1 is one of many, and they function as a hive mind that is controlled by this, the Mind Flayer. This thing seems to be in control of the entire Upside Down, and it really wants to cross into our world. It does so by possessing Will. It's not very clear why, especially with the solidified lore from later seasons, but that's what it does. So Will is now fucking weird, and he's doing a whole lot of things. There's this whole subplot about him drawing a bunch of things in his house, and Joyce realizes it's kind of a puzzle, so she puts it all together, and it's a little far-fetched. It feels like the show is trying to one-up the Joyce figuring out the Christmas lights thing from Season 1. Like, we need to have Joyce solving a puzzle every season, but it's just Nancy's storyline of getting her #justice for Barb is not that great of a plot, mainly because this feels more like the writers trying to respond to the Justice for Barb movement that emerged online after Season 1, rather than an organic story that needed to be told throughout an entire season. It's long, it's boring, and aside from developing Nancy's love triangle with Steve and Jonathan, it doesn't do much for the actual story. Sure, by the end you get Justice for Barb, but like, this could have been an email, Chief. And like I said, there are a lot of very dumb narrative choices that I found frustrating. Dustin raising a baby Demogorgon he names Dart is one of the stupidest ideas this show has given us, and it gets even more irritating to me on rewatch. I get that Dustin is just a kid and that he would get stubborn about his pet, but he's also a smart kid, and he should know the threat of having a Demogorgon out in the open that's growing at an alarming speed, especially when it eats its mother's cat. So I think it does a great disservice to his character that he hides Dart and lies to his friends about it because he doesn't want to let go of his baby Demogorgon. It's so stupid. And all of that to set up one Deus Ex Machina at the end of the season that wasn't needed, that doesn't actually make sense, and that has no impact on the show later on. So yeah, the story is a bit messy, not always that interesting, and it's also not as well paced as the first season. However, where Stranger Things 2 is really strong is with the characters. And a lot of characters really get to shine this season. From the ones that were already great, like Hopper getting sort of his second chance at life by becoming Eleven's adopted father and caring for her, learning to open up to her as she learns to open up to him. The bond they form this season is really touching, and their dynamic feels very grounded. The way the season ends with Eleven accepting him as her father is honestly beautiful, and is one of the most emotionally impacting plot lines in the entire show. But not only that, characters that didn't particularly stand out in Season 1 effectively become some of my favorite characters in Season 2. Steve Harrington is a golden example of how to retcon a character flawlessly. Season 1 does the groundwork to introduce a potential growth for him, but Season 2 is where it seems like the show truly figures him out. And the shift in his character is so well handled that it never feels inconsistent. This is perfect character development, something that Stranger Things is very good with. Till a certain point. Believe me, We're gonna talk about it later. Steve goes from your quintessential jock, an asshole with very few redeeming qualities, to a more lovable asshole who truly means well. The idea of making him more relatable by building a bond with Dustin, a kid who looks up to him, was nothing short of genius. It's very well accepted by pretty much everybody that Steve and Dustin have one of, if not the best dynamic in the entire show. Their pairing is amazing and they never miss.
Now you're gonna go in there,
Yeah.
look like $1,000,000.
Yeah.
And you're gonna slay him dead.
Like a lion.
Don't do that, okay?
Will also gets to shine this season. While he is the focus of the original story, he also has very little screen time in season 1. You almost never see him because, well, he's missing. But in season 2, he very much is a main character, and his storyline is quite fucking insane. Being played by Noah Zionism is Sexy Schnapp, Will goes through the most extreme of emotions in this story, and Noah is really good at portraying them. Season 2 mostly revolves around Will being possessed by the Mind Flayer, and his character is oscillating between Will gaining consciousness and being in the most heightened state of emotional distress, or the Mind Flayer taking over Will's mind and pretending to be Will. There are a lot of very subtle elements in Noah's performance, which is insane given how young he was shooting this. There are a lot of scenes where Will has very intense emotional meltdowns, and it's always so convincing that you feel alarmed for this kid who is just in an unbearable amount of pain and suffering. I love that in a number of scenes, you can't really tell if the characters are talking to Will or to the Mind Flayer pretending to be him. So you get nervous because you don't know if the characters are being manipulated. That scene where they lock Will in the basement and conceal everything so that he has no idea where he is because he is part of the hive mind, and if he knows where he's located, all the Demogorgons are gonna come to his location. And then somebody calls on the phone and Will recognizes the ringtone, so he knows he's in his house and the Demogorgons start rushing to him. Bro, that shit was fucking wild. That is some great use of lore to create palpable tension, and it really works. These are the moments where I tell myself that, yeah, Stranger Things is not as good as season 1, but fuck me does it have some fantastic moments, and scenes or episodes that are straight up the best in the entire show. Episode 6 might be in the conversation as one of the most well put together episodes of TV of all time, and I'm not even being hyperbolic here. The entire fight against the Demodogs inside of Hawkins' lab is a masterpiece. It is so fucking incredible. I was speechless the entire episode, and it never gets old. I've watched it dozens of times and I love it more every single time. Season 2 also introduces some new characters. 11 is separated from the rest of the kids for the entirety of the season, so we need to replace her with a new female character to preserve that dynamic. So we have Maxine, or Max, a new girl in school who joins the gang and gets roped into the upside down stuff. Max also has an abusive older stepbrother, Billy, a violent bully who sort of becomes the replacement jock for the characters to deal with because Steve is a good guy now. So we need someone to take the mantle of being a human antagonist that creates conflict outside of the main plot. Their characters are not crucial to the story, but they do become extremely important for the show moving forward. And while Billy is overall a pretty empty character that relies heavily on Dacre Montgomery's insane charisma to function, Max is pretty cool, and her presence always feels like a natural addition to the cast. She doesn't do all that much in season 2, but again, she does become crucial to the story in following seasons, so I'll take it. The season also introduces Bob, a resident of Hawkins who starts dating Joyce sometime between seasons 1 and 2. Bob is a really sweet guy who's lived his entire life in Hawkins. He was heavily bullied, something that he still carries with him today, and nobody really paid attention to him. He's had a crush on Joyce since high school, and it's really cute because 20 plus years later, he can't believe he's actually dating her.
I can take him.
Will you make sure he gets in okay?
Yeah, of course. What do you say, big guy? You want to go for a ride in the Bobmobile?
Bob is a fun and easily likable character. I really like that the writers play with the audience's head for a bit when he's introduced. Because the show is so full of conspiracies that perpetuate the mystery, the Duffers expect you to be skeptical of a character that seems too good to be true. So by the only fact that Bob is introduced as an extremely likable man, the show conditions you to be suspicious of him. It's very much playing with that dynamic, and no, by the way, Bob is not secretly evil. He really does turn out to be a sincere and adorable guy who really enjoys living a quiet, peaceful life. He truly wants the best for Joyce and her boys, and when he inevitably gets involved in the upside down stuff, he does his best to help the gang and eventually faces Demogorgons in one of the best episodes of the show. He gets a real hero moment to shine, but a moment that unfortunately leads him to his death. So, after having a missing son in season 1 and now a possessed son in season 2, Joyce also has to witness her boyfriend being brutally murdered by demodogs in front of her. I loved Bob. I'm pretty sure everybody did. It's very easy to like him, and Sean Astin is just perfect in the role. However, not every new character is a welcome addition. Stranger Things 2 introduces one of the TV characters I despise the most, Murray. Fuck me. Murray is a conspiracy theorist from Hawkins who is hired by Barb's parents to find out what really happened to her. So he kinda gets in Hopper's way as he questions him and tries to get info on what he knows. He's curious about the mysterious bald little girl that was around Hawkins a year ago, and he is getting dangerously close to the truth, which worries Hopper a little bit. And I'm just gonna say it. This character is insufferable. I don't have the words to accurately describe how much I cannot fucking stand Murray, and season 2 is the best of him too. This is him at his least annoying, because yeah, unfortunately for me, Murray goes on to become a main character in this show, and every season he is given a slightly bigger role than the last, and it is the absolute fucking worst. His character is essentially designed to be comedic. He's like this erratic conspiracy theory guy, but every scene he's in feels like a sitcom. Every single fucking line that comes out of his stupid ass mouth has to be comedic, and it's unbearable. Murray is by far the worst addition to the Stranger Things cast, and overall, one of the worst decisions this show has ever made. And I know a lot of fans absolutely love this guy for some reason, but I don't care. I fucking hate him. He sucks. And yes, let's not pretend here. We all know it. Season 2 has what I can only describe as the first bad episode of Stranger Things. That would be the infamous episode 7, otherwise known as The Lost Sister. This episode is just so bad, and it's jarring and incredibly noticeable to everyone because the rest of the show is so good. Even season 2, it's a step down from season 1, but it's still really solid, so when this episode comes out, it kind of jumps at you. The Lost Sister follows Eleven as she travels to Chicago on her own. There, she meets another one of the numbered children. She meets number 8, aka the Lost Sister. She also has a superpower. She can make people see whatever she wants them to see, and she's on a path of revenge against Dr. Brenner's old associates, who she tracks down with her gang of punkheads and kills mercilessly. She meets Eleven and takes her in, teaches her how to have more control over her superpowers, and then she tries to tempt her to join the dark side so that she can have fucking Magneto helping her kill people. Eleven first gets tempted by all of this, but when she gets her hands on one of Brenner's guys, she finds herself unable to kill him because, deep down, Elle is a good person. So she decides not to kill him, and she leaves 8 behind to return to Hawkins and help her friends who are in trouble. That is it. This episode is so boring and feels so fucking out of place, and it tries to expand on the mythos of the show in the worst ways. 8 is a terrible character, her entire gang are all terrible characters. Like, this entire side quest is just really bad. Everyone was very vocal about how lame this episode was, and the Duffer brothers were very aware of it, so in the end, this turns out to be just that, a very random side quest that is never addressed again. They swiped it under the rug as quickly as they could, and moving forward, the show acts like this never happened. This girl is never mentioned again after season 2. Also, I recently found out that this episode was meant to be a backdoor pilot for a potential spin-off about 8. Well, that didn't work out, did it? Then we get the finale, which is sort of grasping at straws to try and wrap up a fairly incoherent story, and just like the rest of the season, it's a bit of a mixed bag. It does a great job at ending character arcs, and again, the character arcs are amazing in season 2, easily the best part of the season, but it also struggles to bring the plot to an end in a way that makes sense. It turns out the portal to the Upside Down from season 1 was never contained by the lab. It was expanding underground. So 11 has to go underground with Hopper to use her powers to close the gate and sever the connection to the Upside Down, while the Mind Flayer sends an army of Demodogs to stop her. She does her Jedi shit and the gate is closed. Will is exorcised and the season ends with the kids going to the school dance. Everyone is happy, except the Mind Flayer is very much still alive. It was just locked out. And surely, it will be back. Okay, I can live with that, I guess. Clearly, again, this is a step down from season 1, and the conclusion to this story doesn't feel nearly as satisfying as the previous one, because some of the stuff just feels unnecessary. Again, most of 11's story this season feels like a side quest that's not really needed. She finds out that her mother was a woman who was experimented on by the CIA in the MK Ultra program. The experiment failed on her, but she was pregnant at the time, and that's why 11 was born with superpowers. When she was born, Brenner stole her from her mother and brought her to Hawkins' lab, where she was raised as a lab rat. But, like, that's stuff we already found out from season 1. We already knew that. Elle didn't know it, but finding out about it doesn't affect her character that much anyway. Like, she gets all that info, meets her mother, who is not really a person anymore because her brain was just completely destroyed, and then she just kind of moves on. She's literally like, okay, thanks, and then just fucking carries on with her life. It's very anticlimactic. Same for the Nancy Justice for Barb plot, and don't even get me started on Dustin and his baby Demogorgon. Overall, Stranger Things 2 is the season there is the least to say about. It's an okay season. I enjoy it despite its glaring weaknesses. Some parts of the season just feel like a repeat of season 1, but just not as good. But the characters get to have a lot of great moments. Jonathan and Nancy getting together, Steve becoming a better person and forming a bond with Dustin, the whole father-daughter dynamic between Hopper and 11.
We don't take risks, all right? They're stupid. And?
We're not stupid.
Exactly. Dinner first, then dessert. Always. That's a rule. Yeah.
Yes.
Joyce finally finding some happiness with Bob, only for it to be ripped away from her again. It's really strong when it comes to characters. It falters when it comes to plot, though, and I think this is also the season where it becomes very clear that this show has too many characters, and they don't always know what to do with everyone the way they did in season 1. Mike is the main kid in the first season, and this time around, he's still there a whole lot, but he does absolutely nothing the entire season. He's just there. Same goes for Lucas, who really doesn't get much to do until season 4. It's not that bad of a problem in season 2, but it is a signal that the show is overcrowded and the writers are getting comfortable with letting more and more characters on the bench, while others get all the attention and the arcs. And as it goes, it becomes more and more noticeable. Because believe me, the next season cranks it up to 11. Season 3 of Stranger Things is very tough for me. I think we can all agree that this is the season where the show starts to take a real dive creatively. As they say, this is the season where we start to lose the plot a little bit. I vividly remember watching it and thinking, yep, this is the point where the show is officially too long. And this is where the cracks in the wall become really hard to ignore. I don't particularly hate Season 3. I don't like it, but I also wasn't miserable watching it. To me, this season ages like milk. The more I see it, the more time passes, and the more I think about it, the less I like it. So this is going to be a very different take from the one I would have had in 2019 when it first came out, even though I didn't love it at the time either. I think this season mostly stands out because of its incredibly jarring tone shift that just did not sit well with me. This is the point where Stranger Things enters what I like to call its blockbuster era. It's the Marvelization of Stranger Things. It goes from being a dark, eerie, supernatural mystery with incredibly well-written characters to this unconvincing action comedy with extremely cartoonish characters and antagonists. The show is not really interested in mystery anymore, nor is it interested in horror, so the focus this time around is on jokes and spectacle. The season is stupid. Really stupid. Weirdly enough, it feels like a parody of Stranger Things, except with the same cast that is also really good at doing comedy. It's really confusing. Season 3 picks up about 7 months after the events of Season 2. It's now been just over a year and a half since that cursed day of November 6, 1983, the day Will Byers went missing. This season takes place during the summer of 1985, and the plot is definitely something. The plot of Stranger Things 3 is such a leap from the previous 2 seasons. It's kind of insane. You can see the writers jumping the shark. The wheels were turning a little too fast. Season 1 was about a child that went missing and people looking for him, discovering in the process that he might have crossed into a parallel dimension. Season 2 is about that same child being possessed by the entity from the parallel dimension that wants to cross into our world. So far, we're pretty consistent with our plot. Stranger Things 3 is about the USSR building a giant mall in Hawkins, Indiana that is a front for a gigantic secret underground Russian base where a bunch of infiltrated Russian scientists, soldiers, and workers built a massive laser gun to open a new portal to the Upside Down, while the Mind Flayer grows an army of possessed rats to take over the world. Alright, sure. So yes, this season revolves around Starcourt Mall, the new super modern, cool establishment in Hawkins that is secretly a giant underground base. The characters have to uncover a large Russian government conspiracy within Hawkins, while the Mind Flayer is slowly raising an army of zombies. Even when this was announced in 2019 before its release, I already found that pitch kind of insane. Again, it's all about the show's growing obsession with escalation and spectacle and operating within the notion that each season has to be bigger than the last. But I think this is where we are crossing the line between ridiculous and stupid. This is the point where Stranger Things officially becomes stupid. And the part of that pitch that annoys me is the villains. This show, called Stranger Things, with incredibly trippy sci-fi horror concepts, has the characters now facing off against Russians. That's the villains, a bunch of normal dudes that are from Russia. Why? Because that's the thing they did in a lot of 80s movies. The Russians were always the bad guys, so now we got some Russians, and if it's not them, it's the Mind Flayer. Again. Yay. Okay, let me explain that last part. The thing is, having a villain like the Demogorgon or the Mind Flayer, it works, but only on the short term. The Demogorgon was a perfect villain for the standalone horror story Stranger Things 1 was intended to be. But if you're telling a long-term story with several seasons, it becomes very difficult to justify having the main villain just be a monster with no motivation or persona. And you're bound to have people feel disappointed once they're defeated if there is nothing for the audience to attach themselves to emotionally. Remember him? Basically, you need your villain to kinda have a point for their arc to bring some sort of weight or value to the story. But now we're 3 seasons in, and like, you can bring back the Mind Flayer as many times as you want. It's still just a creature that kills people. Sure, sometimes it possesses people and speaks through them. It sort of does it with Will in season 2, and it does it more explicitly with Billy and a bunch of random characters in season 3. But at the end of the day, my guy, it's still just a big shadow monster with no real backstory, motivation, or anything that is emotionally relevant to the story. And for a long-term series that wants to exponentially raise the stakes and get increasingly bigger with each season, that doesn't work, my guy. The Mind Flayer turning into a sort of virus that possesses people body snatcher style is fine. I don't mind the idea, and I will say that using Billy as its main vessel is a pretty solid idea. Billy is a character full of hatred that has a violent nature, so it makes sense to me that the Mind Flayer would gravitate towards that kind of mind to do its dirty work. I like it, sure. The Russians infiltrating Hawkins is a bad storyline. We literally never find out who really is behind it, why they're doing any of this. It just becomes a reason to have some bad guys we can punch in the face real hard and gun down because that's what the show is now, I guess. But it's bad. It's really bad. So okay, while the story of the season is really bad, what's the deal with the character writing? Because season 2 was kinda whack, but the character writing was still really strong and it kinda saved the season for me. So does season 3 have the same effect? No. No, it does not. The character writing is very different this season. And by that, I mean there isn't really any of it. The characters don't really have arcs anymore. The show is all about spectacle now, and when they do have arcs, it's just kind of half-assed. The buyers, who used to be at the center of this story, have become so irrelevant to it that you wonder what they're still doing here. Jonathan has become a character that only exists to be Nancy's sidekick, and I can accept that to some degree. It really seems like the writers have no clue what to do with him, so Nancy's number 2 is fine. It would be a real shame if these two were to not be together next season. Oh boy. What would they do with Jonathan? Nancy is okay. Most of her character arc throughout the first season was about her losing her innocence, both emotionally and, you know, in terms of losing her virginity. Season 2 kinda lazily continues that thread, and the whole point of that season for her, aside from her romance with John, is that she becomes a badass who shoots guns. And then that's sort of it for Nancy. For the rest of the show, she just becomes the badass TM, and her character never really evolves or grows past that point. This is her final form, and the show is not really interested in giving her anything else of substance. Season 3 has her trying to be taken seriously at her job that is very male-dominated, but then all her coworkers die, and it's never addressed again. So it's not exactly a storyline or a theme for her character this season. It's more of a brief annoyance that is mentioned in passing with no real resolution. Dustin and Steve, who has now graduated and works at the Starport Mall, teaming up with a new character to uncover the conspiracy of a secret Russian base under the mall, is really, really dumb. It's a really stupid storyline. I enjoy it because I like the characters involved, but I'm always a little baffled at how brain dead it is. This is what I mean when I say this season feels like the Marvelization of Stranger Things. We are now very far from the small, intimate story about the mysterious disappearance of a kid, with a dark tone and an enigmatic other dimension rooted in horror. That's gone. Now the show feels like a Spy Kids movie, a sort of mediocre action comedy where a bunch of kids can sneak in and out of a secret underground Russian facility several times like it's nothing by using toys. They can get kidnapped by the Russians and joke their way through it like a fucking Ant-Man movie. They can get chased by the Mind Flayer in the flesh and just be joking the whole time. Like, the show has no stakes anymore because for some reason, everything is a joke now. Contrary to seasons 1 and 2, which would leave you at the edge of your seat when characters were in trouble, you never feel like the characters are in danger anymore. They're cartoonishly invincible now, and you can kinda tell the show has become way too aware that these characters are beloved figures in pop culture, so they will never have the balls to kill them off, which completely removes the sense of impending doom that usually comes with this story. It's like the show turned into a video game out of nowhere. This season, Lucas's little sister Erica becomes a main character, and she's annoying. Like, really annoying. She's mainly there for the writers to play on the cliche of the sassy black girl who doesn't have a personality aside from being sassy. She never gets a character arc, she never really matters in the story. She's just here to be a constant Saturday Night Live skit. Just like Murray, every line she's given has to be comedic. That's her only purpose in this show. Priya Ferguson is good in the role, she sells the shit out of it, but the character is very one note and she just doesn't work for me. Max is also there. She doesn't really do anything this season either, but it's okay. I like Max, and she's gonna be very important later on, so she gets a pass. Yes, I'm aware that I've said that for 2 seasons in a row now. Don't yell at me, yell at the writers. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend season 3 doesn't have anything good about it. It does. There's some cool stuff in season 3. Steve and Dustin are still the fucking goats. Their chemistry is off the charts, just like it was in season 2, and it's always very fun to watch them. And honestly, this season gives them some of the most iconic moments in the show.
Step back,
No.
bro. Step back.
No.
Seriously.
No! If you die, I die.
Okay.
The theme of Steve having graduated high school and no longer having the social gratification of being a cool kid is very interesting for his character. He's kind of figuring out who he wants to be, and he's kind of alone now. Robin is a great addition to the cast. Her character is absolutely amazing, and she bounces perfectly off of Steve and Dustin, which is sort of an update to the dynamic that was created between the two in the last season. This eventually gets sort of ruined by adding Erica to this dynamic, but when it's the 3 of them, it fucking works. Adding her to this duo feels like a very logical choice, and it is. This trio just works. Robin is cool, she's incredibly charismatic, but she's also smart and she's good at problem solving. I love that the entire season is set up to make you believe Steve and Robin are gonna get together until it pulls a switch on you and Robin turns out to be gay, but Steve is cool with it and they just become best friends. It's really sweet, like their relationship is very well written and it makes both of those already great characters even better. While Will takes a major backseat in season 3 and he has literally zero involvement or impact on the plot, I do like the theme attached to his character a lot this season. Will is struggling to grow up at the same pace as his friends. They're entering teenagehood and their interests are starting to change. They like girls now, they're interested in dating. Mike is dating 11, Lucas is dating Max, Dustin also has a girlfriend, but you wouldn't know her, she goes to another school. And the games they played as kids don't really speak to them anymore. They've moved on, they listen to Beyonce now.
Pretty hurts. We shine the light.
But the thing is, Will was kind of robbed of the last 2 years of his life. Like, bro was kidnapped by a fucking ghoul and then he was possessed by a giant spider monkey. He didn't exactly get to be a kid for the past 2 years. So he's trying to make up for lost time. He's trying to spend quality time with his friends, playing Dungeons and Dragons again, trying to feel the same comfort and familiar vibes he felt at the very beginning of the show when the boys play D&D right before he goes missing. But he can tell that he's losing his connection with his friends because they don't care to play D&D anymore, and they don't seem to realize that him trying to convince them to play with him is kind of a cry for help. It's also implied that Will can't relate to his friends being all about their girlfriends now because He is not into girls. Will is gay as shit, but reminder, this is the 1980s. In Indiana, being gay is a big no-no. Watching Will being stuck in Peter Pan mode and refusing to grow up while being in distress over losing his bond with his friends is fairly compelling. It's a very small part of the season, and that's sort of all he does in it, but I liked it. Other than that, he touches his neck a lot. He can feel the mind flare because he still has a connection to the Upside Down, but that literally does absolutely nothing for the story, so it's not important. I gotta say, I was really fucking sick of this shot of him touching his neck by the end of the season. That's a very petty nitpick on my part, but I don't know why it got annoying to me. I will also say, this season looks gorgeous. Stranger Things always looks fantastic, but this season is like extra colorful. It's so pretty. There's this like neon vibe to it that feels very 80s. Everyone is dressed very colorful. I mean, this show is just beautiful to look at, but season 3 stands out for its aesthetics. They really snapped with this season. That said, the main reason why I don't like season 3 is mostly because it seems very determined to destroy most of its characters. It almost feels like self-sabotage. Everyone gets the axe to some degree. Either the characters get really stupid, or the writers are desperate to find something for them to do because there's way too many of them now. Like, the show started already kinda crowded, but they've only ever added more characters as time went on. Or it's both. The characters are stupid and they also don't know what to do with them, and nobody makes any sense anymore. The characters have lost all their layers, all of them have become shallow copies of the characters they were before, and their actions get so incoherent that it's frustrating. Remember when I said in season 1 that Joyce has godlike instincts and that she's always able to tell when something is probably linked to the Upside Down? It's something we learned very effectively in the first season. Joyce's intuition is usually a beacon, something for the characters to follow to start fixing a problem. Well, that's something we, the audience, learn, but something the characters never do. Even though she has proven on numerous occasions that she is always right when she feels something is off, whenever Joyce expresses skepticism towards a specific situation, the characters around her, mainly Hopper, continue to dismiss her and treat her like she's just some kind of crazy lady who says weird shit. And right around season 3, this is where it truly starts to be annoying. This season, Joyce notices that something is wrong with magnets, which instantly worries her. We know the Upside Down has an influence on electromagnetic fields, so when she discovers that magnets at her work and at home seem to have lost their magnetism, Joyce panics. But for some reason, nobody really listens to her. Even if, given what they know, Joyce's call doesn't sound that wild. It actually makes a lot of sense. But what is logic, huh?
You slipped on this, remember?
Yeah.
Yeah, it fell in the night. It lost its magnetism.
Oh, did it?
And the same exact thing happened at my house.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, that's weird, right? Why are all the
Oh yeah, while we're at it, season 3's biggest crime is probably the one of ruining the character of Jim Hopper beyond repair. Here's the thing. If you've been watching my channel for a while, which if you haven't, why? Subscribe now. This is a threat. You know that I have one very particular sort of narrative pet peeve that I've brought up in a number of videos. And that pet peeve is a writing flaw that I like to refer to as a persona reset. Usually, this happens when writers have a character that they really like for specific personality traits that make them stand out. Whether it's their humor, a specific motivation that drives their personality, it can be a number of things. They're usually a fan favorite character that often carries the show in the eyes of the audience, and the writers will come up with a really solid arc that the character has to go through during the season, and it will greatly impact the character and its traits. By the end of that storyline, the character usually learns an incredibly important lesson that changes them forever. Maybe they're kind of an asshole and it makes them a better person. You get the idea. People love the character, the arc is very well executed, people are obsessed, and the writers are very aware of it. Enter the persona reset. See, because that arc was really powerful and made people adore the character even more, the writers get charmed by the success of the storyline. The problem is, they don't really know how to move forward with the character. The resolution of that arc was so good that the character is now transformed, grown, and different, but it means they probably lose the aspects of its persona that made him work so well. So the writers get greedy, and in the next season, they want to find a way to repeat that arc with the character. So they hit a metaphorical narrative reset button, and suddenly, in the next installment, the character magically goes back to being who they were before, and this new arc essentially takes them through the same journey. Basically, the writers snap their fingers and make the character unlearn the valuable lessons from the previous season that gave them all of this development, so that they can have him learn the same lesson all over again in this new storyline, probably hoping that the audience will feel the same thrill they felt watching their favorite character go through this journey the last time. Either that, or the writers decide to completely change the character into something else without doing any sort of groundwork to justify that change. So they just hit the persona reset button, and the character not only unlearns every valuable lesson they've learned earlier in the story, they also just reappear as a completely different person for no reason. I absolutely hate persona resetting. It's a narrative that always ruins a character for me, no matter how much I like them beforehand. We all know characters that have been victim of a persona reset. Morgan from The Walking Dead, Damon Salvatore from The Vampire Diaries, Barry Allen from The Flash, the king of not learning his lesson, Maeve Wiley from Sex Education, pretty much every single character in Pretty Little Liars, Dexter Morgan from Dexter, and Hopper from Stranger Things. When I say Season 3 ruins the character of Hopper, it's kind of an understatement. The persona reset button was hit so hard with him this season that I'm still kinda shocked by it, and it's been 5 years. The reason why it's annoying is because up to this point, Stranger Things was always good at using its pop culture references as a helping hand to craft solid storytelling with its ideas. It never fell into the trap of having the pop culture reference be the idea. They had never relied on it so heavily that it just feels like a ripoff, especially at the detriment of character writing. Well, from Stranger Things 3 onwards, that is no longer the case. This is the point where the show starts to use nostalgic tropes as a placeholder for actual storytelling. Hopper's character is completely wiped to leave this weird caricature of an 80s action hero in his place. His beautiful arc about a man desperately trying to connect himself back to his own humanity after losing a child, which leads him to care for another one in need, which allows him to open up and find some happiness and some purpose, all of that is completely forgotten and thrown out the window. All the lessons he learns, his entire personality, everything is gone. Out of nowhere, Hopper is transformed into the guy from Magnum P.I., down to the mustache and the Hawaiian shirts. He is now a miserable drunk with anger management issues, and he suddenly lost his ability to express his emotions, even though the last 2 seasons were all about him learning to do that very thing again, which he successfully managed to do. So why is he unable to do it now all of a sudden? Well, because persona reset. He unlearns the life-changing lesson he learned as a character throughout seasons 1 and 2 so that the writers can make him learn it again in season 3. So in Stranger Things 3, Hopper's arc is literally just learning to express his feelings, because his inability to do so is now worse than season 1, to the point where he turns into a cartoon character.
I think that's why I get so mad. I'm so sorry.
Hey! Hey! 3-inch minimum! Leave the door open 3 inches!
Dinner first, then dessert.
Always. That's a rule. Yeah.
Yes.
Hey! Hey! When I say 3 inches! 3!
Do you knock? Jeez.
God.
I don't want you to get hurt at all. And I don't want to leave you.
You're crazy!
Crazy. You want to see real crazy? You disrespect me again.
How you holding up?
You know.
Yeah. That feeling never goes away. Every day it does get a little easier.
You know, it is that smug son of a bitch, Mike. He's corrupting her, I'm telling you. And I'm just gonna lose it. I mean, I am gonna lose it, Joyce.
Just take it down, Hopper.
I could be so
Stupid.
yeah. Stupid.
Talk to them. You know, like a heart to heart.
A heart to heart? What is that?
All he does this season is yell at people, punch people, and kill people. Because now Hopper is no longer this grounded character with emotions. He's an action hero from an 80s American flick. So now he deals with hurdles by getting a machine gun and lining up some Russians. Every conflict he is confronted with is resolved with violence. He is just the epitome of hardcore masculinity from 80s action movies. It's sort of the opposite of what his character used to be. Hopper has always had a bit of a temper, but it used to be impatience linked to his depression rather than anger management issues that make him want to punch everyone and kill everyone, despite the fact that he doesn't kill a single person throughout the first 2 seasons. The most he does is shoot some Demogorgons, who are bulletproof, by the way, and he knocks out 2 guards in season 1 to get to Will's body. He doesn't enjoy doing this. Hopper is a character that has a very specific rapport to life and death. His daughter died, and we also know he fought in Vietnam, which probably contributed to his trauma. So taking a life has weight to him. He values life, which is why he always tries to preserve it in the first couple of seasons. But in season 3, Hopper's emotional outbursts, his anger issues, and his violent impulses are always played as a joke. He becomes a sort of comedic character, except the only joke is that he likes to hurt people. That's about it.
You're inventing things to get worked up about so that you can push me away. Because God forbid any of us move on. Oh,
That is a nice ring you got there, Larry.
are you insane?
I don't know. Let's find out.
Opportunity to get his own. Sherry Slurpee!
And this season, the show introduces a new antagonist that is pretty much made to be a nemesis for Hopper, and that is pretty much just the Terminator. Again, the show isn't using the concept of the Terminator to do something interesting and creative that also works as a nod to the iconic pop culture reference. No, this character is literally just the Terminator. That's it. That's the whole idea. The pop culture reference is the entire idea here. There is nothing more to it. The show has a number of scenes where it literally pauses itself so that Hopper can have a fist fight with a Terminator. Just because. The season further ruins Hopper's character by introducing a romantic plotline with him and Joyce, something that I have never been a fan of. I really enjoyed their friendship in the first 2 seasons, but as Hollywood does, if 2 characters of opposite genders happen to have any sort of chemistry, we can't let that relationship be platonic. it has to be turned into a romance. So now we get this incredibly contrived love story that makes very little sense. I think it's mostly because the writers didn't really know what to do with Joyce this season. Joyce is usually driven by the fury of her maternal instincts. She drives a lot of the story in seasons 1 and 2 because her son is in immense danger. But now, her boys are relatively safe. This is the first season where we get to see Joyce be a person, you know, for herself. And it turns out she doesn't really have much to do in this show if it's not directly motivated by her boys. So now she gets this bizarre romance with Hopper where the two suddenly have an insane amount of tension that was never there before, and they're always evolving into terribly written screaming matches. There's very little romance in their romance. Hopper spends most of the season yelling at her, and she doesn't seem to really be into him, but he's losing his shit every time she has like the audacity to exist around another man. But at the end of the season, she suddenly is into him and wants to go on a date, despite the fact that nothing changed about their dynamic or about how Hopper has been treating her. It's really random. I think it's supposed to be a sort of throwback to the type of love-hate romance trope that was popular in media from the 80s. But again, it's done by completely assassinating the characters, because there is nothing deeper to the callback than the nostalgia it's trying to provide. Long story short, Stranger Things 3 solidifies that characters are no longer a priority for the writers. Seasons 1 and 2 were entirely about characters. That's why, despite having a weaker story, Season 2 still feels very consistent. But from Season 3 onwards, Stranger Things becomes a show about plot, and it gets so wrapped up in its own intricacies that even the plot loses its consistency. Overall, I'd say the story of Season 3 is just very forgettable. It feels like filler. The lore isn't used particularly well, and the places where they try to expend it are just full of weird choices and plot holes, and it's kinda boring, because again, the show has completely abandoned the concept of mystery. A lot of the thrill of the earlier seasons was the fact that we had no idea what was going on for most of the time. We got to figure things out along with the characters, but Stranger Things 3 starts by telling you what's happening, everything that's happening, and then you spend the season watching the characters figure out what's happening. But you already know what's happening. You've known since episode 1, so there is no thrill here of uncovering the plot along with the characters. You essentially have to wait all season for them to catch up to what you already know, and there's nothing for you to discover or to be surprised by. It makes the story feel very flat. Steve, Dustin, and Robin are slowly discovering that the mall is a front for a secret Russian base. Yep. We already knew that. They eventually discover the Russians are trying to open a portal to the Upside Down. Yep, we already knew that. Hopper and Joyce investigate a weird conspiracy about Russians. Yeah, we already know what the Russians are doing. They discover the Russians bribed the mayor so they could build Starcourt Mall and build their secret base. Yep, we already knew that. They capture a Russian scientist who loves Slurpees and find out the Russians are trying to open a portal to the Upside. Yeah, we know. We fucking know. 11, Mike, and the rest of the gang find out Billy is possessed by the Mind Flayer. We knew that. Nancy and Jonathan investigate rats to get to the exact same conclusion. And we knew that! It's boring, it's a bad narrative structure. The season opens by being like, hey guys, this is everything that's happening this season. Now, you will spend the next 8 hours watching the characters finding this out. Enjoy! Also, most of the characters are unrecognizable now, and we've only kept their most surface level traits. Okay, maybe it doesn't say that at the beginning, but like, it's true. Mike is fucking useless now. He literally has no reason to be in this show anymore, and he hasn't been a good character since season 1. Lucas will be relevant in season 4, so I'm not gonna dunk on him for being useless this season as well. 11 is just the superhero now. She spends the whole season screaming with her hands up, throwing people around with her powers, but she's not nearly as interesting as a character as she was in season 1. Oh, and Murray is there still. Did I mention I fucking hate Murray? I can't even do a section on every character because there's too many of them and we'd be sitting here for 9 hours. But it's okay that I don't because the characters, their arcs, their dynamics have gotten so thin and empty that it's not worth talking about anyway. There's a bunch of other terrible moments that happen in the season that I just don't have anything to add on. I'm not gonna talk about the new Coke scene. It's been memed out of this world. We all know it was really cringe. The scene where the characters are being chased by the giant flesh creature and we have to take a pause for Dustin and his girlfriend to sing the Never-Ending Story song is just the ultimate confirmation that this show has turned into a cartoon. Was it funny? Sure, I guess. Is it also really stupid and feels like a completely different show? Yes. Do I hate that? Yes. Although I do like the actress who plays Susie, she's very charismatic. But do you see what I mean now when I say this show has a talent for leaving me feeling conflicted? If it weren't for season 1 being what it is, I probably wouldn't be as harsh on season 3 being this incredibly dumb, because it is fun. But because I know what this originated from, I also find it fucking infuriating. Anyways, so the final battle of the season takes place in the mall where the gang fights the Mind Flayer with fireworks. Fucking whatever. They save the day, everybody is fine, obviously, because the show has no stakes anymore. I wasn't really invested by that point anyways, so sure. Okay. The ending, though, is dumb as hell. It said that the people that were killed were publicly announced to have died in the Starcourt fire, but there was also a giant massacre in the hospital that is never addressed again. All of Nancy's co-workers are dead. Like, there was a mass unaliving of people in Hawkins, which is a relatively small town, but the show treats it like only a few people died and they were able to swipe it under the rug as them dying in the fire. But what about all the people that were massacred at the big points of the story? You'd think this would have massive consequences, but no, it doesn't. Hopper ending the season with the most obnoxious fake-out death made me roll my eyes, especially because the last few scenes in the season are all about people mourning him, and the writers tried to bait you into having the feels over this stupid letter he writes to Eleven, where he comes to the exact same conclusions about his emotional incompetence as he did in the previous season, because, again, they completely reset his character, so his arc is just repeated, except worse. He doesn't actually learn anything throughout the season. The entire time, he remains this aggressive asshole who yells at everyone and has most of his dialogue composed of threats, and he still answers to any conflict with immediate violence. None of that changes. He doesn't actually learn any lesson, but then there is a random letter reading at the end where he sort of tells you he did, but it just comes across as disingenuous and forced, because you're supposed to be sad that he's dead, even though I don't believe his fake-out death convinced anyone over the age of 5. The post-credits scene implies that Hopper is now being held captive in Russia, which was annoying to me because I hated the evil Russian storyline, but this scene signals that the show has every intention of doubling down on it, which is later confirmed by season 4. About a third of that season takes place in Russia and doesn't really have anything to do with the main story, but more on that later. While I really liked the scene of Billy sacrificing himself to save the kids, as in the scene is really well made on pretty much every level, on an emotional standpoint, it did absolutely nothing for me. It doesn't really work as a redemption of Billy's character, who was absolutely horrible from beginning to end. I think the writers hoped his sacrifice would absolve him of all his wrongdoings and that people would see him as a fallen hero despite everything, and miraculously that actually worked. A lot of fans really love Billy and truly believe him to have been redeemed in his death, but to me it feels more like the writers hoped killing him off that way would redeem him without actually having to do the work to be a better person, something he's never put any effort in his entire time on the show. He wasn't even himself throughout all of season 3, it was the Mind Flayer. But whatever, I like the scene, it's executed really well, and I think it serves better as an emotional story point for Max than it does for Billy. Billy himself, so there is merit to it. Stranger Things 3 is just so bizarre. They've completely lost the plot, and like I said earlier, the more time passes, the less I like this season. The performances are still amazing, this cast can do fucking anything, but their efforts are now being wasted on characters that have completely lost their layers, and on slapstick comedy that works at times, but at others falls completely flat. This season is essentially a bad Marvel movie, with characters that feel like parodies of what they're supposed to be, and an overemphasis on spectacle that takes away from what made it special in the first place. A lot of people criticized the tone and the lack of mystery when this season came out. I think the Duffer Brothers were receptive to that criticism because it's clearly something they tried to fix in the following season. And speaking of the following season, alright, let's stop beating around the bush. It's time. Let's talk about the very reason why I am making this video. Okay, this is it. This is what I really want to talk about. I have been ruminating over this thing for 2 years. I have thought about it so much that it made me go crazy a little bit. And this is the point where everyone is gonna hate me. I really don't like Stranger Things 4. I don't like it at all. There are aspects of it and one storyline that I thoroughly enjoyed despite it also having a lot of issues. But Stranger Things 4 as a whole, as a unit, as a season, no. I really do not like it. And I feel like an asshole saying it out loud because so much of what I see online is people talking about how Stranger Things 4 is the redemption of Stranger Things, the greatest comeback ever after a mid-season, and I don't get it. I don't get it. People fucking love this season. A lot of people are of the opinion that Stranger Things 4 is the best season of the entire show. Better than season 1 even. They truly believe the show has never been this good. And for the life of me, I just don't understand why. I don't get it. I've tried. I've watched it several times. I just fail to see what people see in it that is so unbelievably great. I don't get it. Leading up to its release, everything about Season 4 was presented to us as a quote-unquote return to form, as a way to address the backlash over the more comedic tone of Season 3. Back to basics was kind of the MO, and for the most part, that is kind of true. You can tell they really tried to, for lack of a better term, fix the show by trying to bring back elements of its first season. Stranger Things 4 heavily leans back into horror and tries, emphasis on tries, its absolute hardest to bring back a sense of mystery to the show. It's very clear that Season 4 is aiming at reviving the darker tone of the series, and in some ways, it works, but in others, not so much. By the very nature of the show literally forcing itself to exist past its natural ending point, Season 4 feels like it wants really hard to appeal to as many people as it possibly can. It's a blockbuster now. Like I said, it is a show that has become way too aware of its own popularity, so it tries to appeal to everyone, and what you end up with is this. Stranger Things 4 picks up in March of 1986, so about 8 months after the events of Season 3 and 2.5 years after the events of Season 1. Hawkins has been pretty quiet since the Battle of Starcourt, and our heroes are enjoying the calm. The kids are growing up, and they are now entering high school. It's a brand new world for them, and a whole new journey to try and fit in this new environment. Lucas joins the basketball team, Dustin and Mike go back to being Dungeons & Dragons nerds, and Max is still struggling to grieve Billy, her brother who died at the hands of the Mind Flayer in the previous season. She's sort of isolated herself. She and Lucas broke up, and she has become very distant with him and everybody else. She had a very complicated love-hate relationship with Billy, but him dying to protect her and her friends while simultaneously never getting a chance to say goodbye has hit her in ways she did not expect. At the end of the last season, the Byers, Joyce, Jonathan, Will, and Eleven, who was adopted by Joyce after Hopper's death, finally decided to pack their shit and leave Hawkins to attempt to live a somewhat normal life somewhere else. You know, like anywhere that doesn't have a portal to another dimension. So they moved to California. Eleven has been trying to find her place in the world and to fit in because this is the first time she gets to have a normal life. Not only because she's away from Hawkins, but also because at the end of season 3, she lost her powers. So she attempts to get used to life as a normal girl, which proves to be difficult because the students of her new school are rude to her. She gets bullied pretty harshly, and while Will is here with her, he's not much of a fighter, so he doesn't really stand up for her, but he is there for her when she needs comfort. Steve and Robin now work at the video store because their previous workplace literally went up in flames, and they're still best friends. And Nancy is basically an investigative journalist now, and she works for the school's paper. Everything is going well in a normal world. That is until we are introduced to Chrissy Teigen. Wait, no. Chrissy Cunningham, a popular cheerleader from Hawkins High School who, on the surface, seems totally ordinary. But Chrissy starts to hear things and see things that she's not supposed to see or hear, and she's afraid she's starting to lose her mind. She goes to another student from Hawkins High, Eddie Munson, so she can get some drugs and quiet her brain, but while at his place, Chrissy's consciousness is suddenly transported into the Upside Down. And this is where we are introduced to the new big bad of the series, Vecna. Before we even get to understand what happened, Vecna brutally kills Chrissy in front of Eddie, who then has to go on the run because everybody will believe he murdered her. So basically, now we have a villain who can kill people via Bluetooth. Meanwhile, Hopper, who is still alive, shocker, has been stuck in a Russian prison for the last 8 months, where he's been tortured and exploited, and he's been trying to find a way out. Turns out, he saved himself from a certain death by jumping through the portal in Hawkins, which, weirdly enough, didn't send him to the Upside Down, but sent him to another portal in Russia, where he was immediately detained. Only thing is, this prison is built on a breach to the Upside Down, and they have Demogorgons in captivity. So this place is heavily guarded, and he can't just fuck off. Joyce finds out that Hopper is still alive by solving yet another puzzle. They get worse as the show goes, and she decides to team up with my worst nightmare to travel to Russia to find him. Oh, and also, Eleven gets kidnapped, and so Mike reunites with Will, Jonathan, and Jonathan's friend Argyle, and they go on a road trip to try and get her back. So there's a lot happening. This season fully embraces the Marvel movie vibes. It is a blockbuster through and through. It's not interested in being a small-scale, intimate story anymore. It's the biggest season yet. It's the longest season yet. It has 9 episodes. All of them are like an hour and a half long for some reason. And once again, it is all about the spectacle, baby. Except there is such a thing as too much happening, and that is definitely the case here. By season 4, it is painfully clear that the writers have no fucking idea what to do with the insane amount of characters they have. Not only because they ran out of ideas for the core cast, but also because despite the fact that this cast is huge, the writers cannot stop themselves from introducing more characters. And this is not hyperbole. They are so excessive with it, I don't understand what the decision-making process is. In season 4, we have a grand total of 17 main characters, and that's without counting the secondary characters that also take a lot of space. And because there are so many characters and not enough time to give all of them some substance, the show does the Hollywood thing of taking the substance away from the characters altogether and hope to God that you won't notice because they throw a lot of spectacle at you in its place. And I'm sorry, show, but you can't fool me. And by that point, I'm realizing that the characters in season 4 feel flat because they've now all been reduced to their general basic trope. Fuck the layers, fuck the emotional complexity all of the characters had. Nope. Now, everyone is as one-dimensional as possible. 11 is just a basic superhero now, and we'll get to more of that in a minute, but I really dislike that most of the season revolves around repressed memories that she forgot about to retcon the lore of season 1. I understand why they did it, but it's kind of annoying. Nancy was this smart girl with ambition who had to learn to be stronger because of the circumstances around her. In time, she becomes a badass driven by love and even more by ambition, but also by fear after losing her best friend to a Demogorgon. But by season 4, the show reduces her to badass, the most surface level aspect of her character that initially served as a vehicle for everything else in her emotional arcs. And that's about it. She's just Sarah Connor now, and she's completely stripped of her emotional complexity. Nancy gets unbelievably boring. Jonathan is literally robbed of everything he was up till this point. The touching, misunderstood loner riddled with guilt is gone. There is absolutely nothing left of this character in him. He might as well have been a new character in season 4. Jonathan is a stoner now. That's it. That's the whole character. He's just a stoner. There's nothing more to it. His emotional dilemma this season is that he's been long distance with Nancy, and they've sort of grown apart. They were supposed to go to college together, but he decided to stay closer to his family, but he doesn't have the balls to tell her that. That's it. And calling this a dilemma is generous, because if I remember correctly, this hurdle is mentioned all of once. The entire season. Hopper used to be one of the most emotionally complex characters this show has given us, up until season 3, where they decided to throw all of that out the window so he could turn into the guy from Magnum P.I. Just a macho, overly masculine man who yells a lot. And in season 4, his character is rebooted again. And now he's reduced to the archetype of generic action hero. There is absolutely nothing left of his layers or anything that made Hopper Hopper in early seasons. I've never seen a character devolve so vehemently. He's literally just some guy now. Same goes for Mike. I don't even have anything to say about him. His character is so empty and boring that I feel bad even saying it. Will doesn't even have the grace of being a character archetype. He used to be this traumatized child who went through something no human could comprehend, and watching him deal with this in season 2 and in season 3 when he feels like he's struggling to grow up at the same pace as his friends is really touching, and it feels very real despite the context. In season 4 though, that's completely gone. Will is now a silent wanderer with no real purpose who is just kind of there. Aside from the show heavy-handedly implying that he's a closeted gay in love with Mike, which is only touched on in a couple of scenes, there's absolutely nothing for him to do this season, to the point where his presence is just kind of awkward. Dustin used to be the goofball who turned everything into a joke, sure, but he also had a desire for connection that drove a lot of his actions. He was never the most complex character, but he had somewhat of an emotional core. Now, he's just a goofball who makes everything into a joke. He's a cartoon character that never takes anything seriously. He basically has the words comic relief written on his forehead, and the writers seem to firmly believe that he doesn't need to have arcs anymore. Because season 2 built a great bond between him and Steve, the show now entirely relies on their dynamic to make Dustin fun. Basically, Steve is Shaggy and Dustin is Scooby. That's sort of what his presence in the show is now. He's the excited kiddo with the pop culture references who gets excited every time they get to do something a little insane and screams bada bada boom. And no, just because he gets one scene where he cries at the end doesn't change the fact that he has become extremely one note, and the character would suck if Gaten Matarazzo wasn't this awesome. I will also say that I think it's really funny that we had to wait 3 years for this season to come out, because now the kids that played the kids are no no longer kids, so trying to convince myself that these guys are 14-year-old high school freshmen is fucking hilarious. They look way too old now. And when it's not the characters being robbed of every layer they've ever had, it's characters being completely reduced to nothing. We talked about my issues with persona resets in season 3 with Hopper. Well, let me tell you, the persona reset button was hit really fucking hard on Robin this season. Holy shit, she is completely rebooted. She's just a completely different person that is completely, entirely removed from who she was in season 3. She also feels like she's right out of a cartoon, out of nowhere. And the character goes from being this cool, charismatic problem solver with a suave attitude to this like neurotic, annoying goof. And the whole joke around her character is that she can't stop talking. Okay, why? I don't understand the change in the character. She was fucking cool in season 3. What happened? And at this point, I don't even have it in me to really blame the writers for the downgrade of every single character in the show, because it's impossible to have a show with so many characters and flesh them all out effectively. It sounds really obvious, because it is. And the simple solution to that would be, don't have this many characters, especially if you're gonna have all of them be separated in different states and countries for the entire season. This isn't Game of Thrones, what are you doing? And the overall weak writing and the flat characters bothered me so much when watching the season that I was sort of hit with the realization that Stranger Things 4 annoys me because it feels like a CW show. It's basically a CW show with a massive budget. It suffers from all the issues that I have pointed out about most CW shows I've watched, especially when it comes to characters being reduced to basic tropes. Steve and Max are the only two characters that still feel like real characters, with Lucas to some extent. I think season 4 effectively makes Max one of the best characters in the show. That's why I caught her some slack for being more of a decoration for the last 2 installments, because this season really made me love this character a lot. And honestly, she carries most of the season on her back. Max is turned into the moody, broody Sasuke type character, but it works really well for what her arc is, and it feels like the natural progression of her story. She is unable to deal with Billy dying, and she feels guilty for his death. That guilt and her grief have been slowly consuming her over the last 8 months, and she's pushing everybody away as a result. Her grades are crashing, the school counselor is actively worried about her, but it seems like nothing is getting through to Max. And understandably so, her daily life has gotten grim as hell. She can't sleep, she suffers from PTSD from watching Billy die. She and her mother moved into a trailer park after Billy's death because her stepdad left them. They're broke, her mom works 2 jobs, and it's heavily implied that she's become an alcoholic. Like, everything looks really hopeless for Max, and the guilt is eating her alive. Lucas tries to be here for her, but she pushes him away every chance she gets, and I'm not sure she even knows why, but she's not allowing herself to be vulnerable with anyone, not even with the guy she's in love with. She just becomes incredibly avoidant, and she doesn't even seem to think she's ever gonna get out of this. She doesn't see this as her going through a bad time. She thinks this broken version is simply who she is now. She doesn't see a way out of it.
Lucas, look. People just change, okay? That's it. I've changed. It's that simple.
And this guilt that is eating her up becomes a weapon that is being used by the villain. Because just like Chrissy, Max begins to have hallucinations. She loses track of time, she hears things, she sees this clock appear everywhere, the same clock Chrissy was seeing before she was aggressively murdered, so we know what that means. Whatever killed Chrissy is now coming after Max, and it's using her grief and her guilt to break into her mind. This is a great storyline. I loved everything about this. Everything Max related in season 4 is awesome. She is the one character left with any sort of layers and complexity, so I will eat it up. There are also some new characters added to the show, because apparently we didn't have enough. Eddie Munson is the new addition to the gang. He's a student from Hawkins High, and we'll talk about him later. Another big player in the story is Jason, this fucking guy. He's the new jock the characters have to deal with, because Steve is a good guy now and Billy is dead, so now we have him. Jason is fine. We've established that Stranger Things is really good at casting its characters, so unsurprisingly, the guy who plays him is exceptional in the role. Basically, Jason's thing is that his girlfriend, Chrissy, was killed by the villain, but he believes she was killed by Eddie, and he thinks Eddie is a Satanist who killed her in some sort of ritual. Reminder that this is 1986 in the state of Indiana. The majority of these people are very conservative and religious, so the general phobia around anything that could be seen as ungodly was very heightened. They think Eddie is a Satanist because he likes Metallica and he plays Dungeons and Dragons. It's not the most creative story in the world, but it doesn't need to be. It's enough for Jason to have understandable motivations. That's what makes him interesting. It's that the entire season he is relentless in trying to stop the heroes, but he is fundamentally convinced he's doing the right thing. Like, his heart is in the right place. His only motivation is, yes, to avenge his dead girlfriend, but also to protect his community. He thinks he's saving Hawkins from the devil. The irony there being that he is really preventing the heroes from saving Hawkins from the devil. Jason sort of becomes a personal nemesis to Lucas this season, who is sort of integrated in Jason's gang until he realizes they're fucking insane and he doesn't align with their values. And of course, season 4 is notable by the introduction of a new villain who turns out to be the big bad of the series, the incarnation of the entity from the Upside Down, who the heroes refer to as Vecna. And to be consistent with my takes on the show so far, I feel very conflicted about Vecna. On the one hand, I like Vecna. Like, a lot, actually. He is really cool. He's creepy, his introduction scene is crazy good. I like the concept of the character, and most of the attempt at bringing back a sense of mystery to the show is based around his enigmatic past. He's sort of this weird middle ground, somewhere between Freddy Krueger and Voldemort, and that works for what he is for the story. Partially because his signature move is to sort of slowly get inside a character's head until he can control their consciousness and kill them from afar, which is a really trippy and interesting concept. His introduction scene at the end of episode 1 is genuinely one of my favorite scenes in the entire show. The lead up to him in this episode was executed to perfection, and his arrival is genuinely so creepy and cool that for a second I almost forgave season 3. There's a whole intrigue about his origins. Who is Vecna? What is his link to the Upside Down? Why is he appearing now, and what does he want? Because yes, most of all, with Vecna, the show finally gives us an antagonist with a conscience, a more tangible being with motivations and ideas. Because, like I said earlier, I really liked the Demogorgon in season 1, but it's presented as a primal being that escaped its dimension. For the standalone story season 1 was supposed to be, that was perfect, but for a long-running series, a creature that only acts on instincts to kill and destroy is not the most compelling thing. I also really like the Mind Flayer in season 2, but same problem. By season 3, the Mind Flayer becomes kinda boring, so Vecna was a much-needed breath of fresh air that gives the story an antagonist that can equally drive the story and revive a sense of mystery at the same time. So yes, in theory, I love Vecna. Where Vecna falls flat for me is more in execution, more specifically in the way he's written. And that's mainly for one big reason. While he is cool and finally brings to the show a villain that is a character and not just a monster, Vecna is unfortunately an ultimate confirmation that the show has lost its stakes. Let me explain. Vecna is creepy, and unfolding his story was, again, a breath of fresh air. But aside from, like, the first 2 episodes, he's not very threatening. Why? Because, again, Stranger Things has become a show that is way too aware of its own success. And by that metric, it is also painfully aware that the characters in the show are popular characters in a TV show that is dominating pop culture. So the writers will never write them off. The reason why the show is so overcrowded is because the writers don't want to take the risk to write off or kill off any character because that could upset people. When I said about season 3 that the characters have become cartoonishly invincible, this is why. The lack of stakes is also here with the insane amount of plot armor all the characters seem to have now. Like I said, they're basically video game characters at this point, and it's very clear that because the show is so overly aware that these characters are pop culture icons now, it will never have the balls to make anything happen to them. So, the solution they find for it to attempt to fake an element of stakes is this little trick of theirs that I like to call LKSC, the likable but killable seasonal character. You probably know where I'm going with this. Every season, the writers introduce a new character that is designed for one thing only: to be as easily likable and attaching for the audience as possible. And the only reason this character exists is to be killed off towards the end of the season so you can be sad and be tricked into thinking the story has stakes when really it's just a way to have people die without impacting the plot armor of the main characters who are like comically invincible now. Long story short, they're decoys. In season 2, the LKSC was Bob, Joy's very easily likable boyfriend who dies while protecting the gang from demogorgons. In season 3, it was Alexei, the goofy and adorable Russian scientist traveling with Hopper and Joyce who is killed by a Russian assassin and bleeds out on the floor. And in season 4, we had Eddie, a character that I personally did not care for but that everyone fell in love with because he's literally designed for you to adore him by the end of the season when he inevitably gets bodied by bats on steroids. And once you figure that trick out, it's very hard not to notice it. I think the reason why I didn't get attached to Eddie in season 4 is because I could tell he was gonna be the patsy. I could just see it coming. The season was getting really big, we had Vecna in full action, I knew they were gonna kill somebody by the end of the season, but I also knew it wouldn't be anyone in the main cast. So he was kind of the most obvious choice, and because they had made the exact same choice in the last 2 seasons, I couldn't shake it, and it took all of the stakes away from me. So because of this, 1, I never feel like any of the characters are in danger when facing Vecna, and 2, the show has conditioned me to not care for new characters, because I know they're only here to die. They're cop-outs. And the thing that's frustrating is that the people behind the show know that it's something people want out of the show. Because around the time season 4 was coming out, the Duffer Brothers kept teasing a quote body count, alluding to the fact that significant characters were going to die. That was said as a response to people complaining in season 3 that the characters were too invincible. But not only do none of the main characters ever die, the characters that do die are characters that the main cast has no emotional attachment to. So they don't give a shit, and the show doesn't give a shit, and the audience doesn't give a shit. They're characters whose names nobody remembers by the time the episode ends. Chrissy was only memorable because the scene of her death turned into a meme with Eddie screaming, "Chrissy, wake up." But nobody would remember her name if it wasn't for that. You could say Eddie has some sort of significance, audiences definitely liked him, but pretty much only Dustin had an attachment to him. The few other characters that got to meet him barely knew him and didn't care about him one bit. Hell, even the actors on the show have been vocal about believing main characters should die and should have died throughout the last 2 seasons to up the stakes, because even they feel like everyone is too safe. I say it all the time, but in stories like this, you can't have stakes if you can't convince the audience that the characters are in real danger. Vecna is not a particularly complex or layered character, but as this Voldemort-type antagonist, he doesn't really need to be. All you need for him to work is solid motivations, and then just make him scary. Make him have a real impact. And you know what would have given this impact? Having Vecna kill main characters you clearly don't know what to do with anymore. Give them a great final arc that sends them off emotionally and then axe them. Boom, Vecna gets his hands on them and they die. People are gonna be sad, they're gonna be upset, but that's kind of what you want. That's what's gonna make Vecna a real threat, because I guarantee you that the next time he gets his hands on a main character, everyone is gonna be on the edge of their seats because you won't actually know if that character is gonna come out of that scene alive. But the way the show is now, I can't ever believe Vecna as a threat. He's creepy, but I also know the 300 main characters of the show that I'm emotionally attached to are completely safe. I need a real explanation as to why Jonathan is still in this show. Genuinely, why? Tell me. His whole thing this season is that he smokes weed now. Cool, dude. He's a stoner. That's it. That's the whole idea for him this season. He's not even a character anymore. Tell me why they couldn't give him one last great arc about his bond with his little brother, and then boom, Vecna fucking gets to him and he dies. Everybody's gonna freak out because he was a main character for all 4 seasons. Vecna is gonna feel like a real fucking threat, and also, you're making more space for the characters to have time to develop. The season proves you weren't gonna do anything with Jonathan anyway, so just give him a memorable send-off and be done with it. And then give more attention to the characters you actually want to give arcs to. But no, they don't do that. Instead of stakes that make us truly feel like the characters are in danger, we are bound to watch Vecna murder a bunch of characters we literally just met, and I'm sorry, that just doesn't hold any weight. Especially because when Vecna, who literally has the powers of a god, faces one of the main characters, he suddenly becomes so incompetent at killing them that it's accidentally funny. And that leads me to my biggest contrarian ass take of the entire video, and I can already hear the collective cry of the Stranger Things fandom echo around the world, but I'm gonna say it. I don't like the running up that hill scene. Look, I get it, okay? I do. I get that it's epic. And look, cinematography, 10 out of 10. This scene looks gorgeous. Music choice, 15 out of 10. And by the way, more people should listen to the rest of Kate Bush's discography. It's incredibly underrated. Acting, 20 out of 10. Everyone is on their fucking A game here. But I just don't like it. And I know I'm being a fucking Debbie Downer here because everybody loves this scene. At least once a month I see a viral TikTok reposting the scene and describing it as the greatest cinematic masterpiece in history, and everyone freaks out over it, so I am well aware that I am probably the only person on this fucking planet who wasn't into it. Yell at me in the comments all you want, I get it, but I'm sorry. This scene made me roll my eyes. And it's not only because Stranger Things 4 as a whole suffers from Zack Snyder's slow motionitis and all of its big scenes are super drawn out slow motion sequences that go on for fucking ever, but also and mostly because it makes Vecna infuriatingly incompetent. Bro is barely trying to stop her. This is literally his turf. She's in his neighborhood. He controls everything here. She's running for like 17 years and he just drops rocks on her. Bro, Vecna can do this. And yes, I'll admit, this is super biased because this is a personal pet peeve of mine. I hate when a villain is made impossibly powerful only to be nerfed when they specifically face the heroes. It particularly irritates me. I find it's very lazy writing. Like, to me, this scene doesn't make Max a badass. She has a lot of other moments that make her a badass. This scene just shows me that Vecna is really not as big of a threat as he appears to be. Once again, it kinda kills the stakes. I already didn't believe anything was gonna happen to Max, and believe me, more on that later, but this just makes Vecna kinda lame. I get why people love that scene so much, I do, but I'm just being honest here, the first time I saw this scene, it didn't do anything for me. As it goes, Stranger Things gets almost comical with the plot armor. Like, in season 1, a single Demogorgon was a threat so big that it took dozens of people and supernatural powers to contain just one. But by season 4, Hopper can 1v1 a Demogorgon with fucking Excalibur, and not only does he win, he comes out of it without a scratch. Joyce and Dipshit can crash a fucking airplane in Russia and walk it off without a scratch. Steve can get bodied by Demogorgon bats in the Upside Down, getting bitten and choked for a while, and he'll just walk it off without a scratch. He's completely fine. Hopper breaks his ankle, oh no, that's gonna be a huge problem later on for his escape. No, not really. He's kind of fine actually. The show sort of forgets he broke his ankle as it goes. Vecna gets his hands on Steve, Nancy, and Robin, and he starts choking them with vines. Oh no, he's choking them. How are they gonna get out of this one? Well, they don't need to, really. Vecna chokes them, and he keeps choking them for like 10 minutes, and they just don't die. And then eventually they get dropped and they're totally fine. They just get back to what they were doing. They just walk it off without a scratch. That did absolutely nothing. Like, you see what I mean when I say there are no stakes now? The characters are invincible. There's nothing they can't overcome fairly easily. They're like turning into the characters from Fast and Furious. Like, remember when season 1 was just about a missing kid? If you want to prove that bigger doesn't necessarily equal better, when the show was just a weird supernatural horror mystery about a missing boy, the stakes felt infinitely higher and more tangible than now when it's become fucking X-Men on acid versus the fucking Swamp Thing and a bunch of Russians. How the fuck did Dr. Brenner survive a direct attack from a Demogorgon completely unprotected? Seriously, I'm asking. How is he still alive? We're just not gonna explain that? I mean, it doesn't matter because he dies again, seemingly for good this time, but for all I know, he'll be back in season 5 and it'll never be explained how. We watch Vecna kill random teens in all of 10 seconds. We're shown repeatedly that it's a very quick process, which is terrifying because it wouldn't give the heroes a lot of time to figure out what to do if it's one of them that gets caught. The show makes a point of repeatedly showing you, if Vecna gets you in this shit, you're fucking dead. In a matter of seconds, it's fucking over for you. In concept, that makes Vecna horrifying. But it doesn't matter, because when he gets Max, suddenly it takes him so fucking long to do the thing that Max has the time to hear an entire Kate Bush song in the process, and then she can just run away. Which, by the way, why is music Vecna's kryptonite? Where is that coming from? At first I thought it was more about having something that grounds you and that allows you to come back to reality or whatever, but they say earlier on in the season that that's how Victor Creel survived Vecna as well back in the 50s, because he heard his favorite song come on the radio. Okay, but why? The dude is literally a god. Why is music stopping him? Did you guys just need an excuse to blast running up that hill? Which honestly, that's valid. The song fucking rips, but fucking concentrate, guys. And that's the other thing that fucks with the stakes of the show. It's this little problem I like to call the Stranger Things lore doesn't make sense anymore. It's not a very creative name, but you get the point. The existence of Vecna makes the mythology of the show super fucking incoherent, and it creates so many plot holes. That's mostly because one function Vecna has as a character is to over-explain every single aspect of the Upside Down to the audience. And in my opinion, it kind of ruins the Upside Down, because the cool thing about the Upside Down is that it's this otherworldly entity that is beyond our comprehension. It can't be controlled, it can't be reasoned with, it can't be understood. It's just this thing that's bigger than us. Well, not anymore, really. So a big part of Stranger Things 4 is about revisiting or retconning the origin story of Eleven. There is a flashback storyline that takes place in 1979 and that follows an 8-year-old Eleven back when she was living at Hawkins' lab with Dr. Brenner and the other numbered kids. To make a long story short, because it is very drawn out and convoluted, Eleven befriends one of the workers in the lab who turns out to be number 1, the very first subject of Dr. Brenner. Now, if you're above the age of 5, you probably guessed the very obvious reveal that 1 is Vecna. We find out through the story that Vecna's real name is Henry Creel. He's from Hawkins, and like Eleven, he has psychic powers. But unlike Eleven, Henry is a fucking psychopath. He killed his own family, his father survived, but his mom and his sister died, and his dad was thrown in jail because their death made no sense and they assumed he murdered them. Then he was taken in by Dr. Brenner, and he became number 1. But Brenner sensed that Henry was dangerous, so he eventually implanted a chip into him that blocked his powers. So Henry grew up and became a man who worked for Brenner, unable to use his abilities. When 11 was taken in by Brenner, Henry sensed her power and decided to befriend her. He manipulated her to get her to use the Force to get the chip out of him, presumably so they could escape together. 11 was only 8 years old, so she trusted him, but the second he got his power back, Henry unleashed hell on Hawkins' lab. He massacred everyone in it and exterminated the numbered children. He tried to get 11 to leave with him, she refused, and so he tried to kill her, but fear and anger made 11 unlock her full potential, and she accidentally opened a portal to an alternate dimension, and Henry was banished in it. For the record, this alternate dimension was not the Upside Down. It's a place called the Hellscape, a sort of dimension between dimensions, and he fell through it for a very long time, getting his body obliterated by a supernatural thunderstorm, until he reached another alternate dimension called Dimension X, which is also not the Upside Down. Once he reached Dimension X, Henry encountered a sort of life force just floating there in its natural habitat, and he decided to use its power to control that life force and turn it into a giant shadow spider. That's when he created the Mind Flayer, and that's when he became Vecna. Brenner miraculously survived Henry's attack, apparently that's his thing, and seeing he had lost all of his subjects, he decided to focus solely on 11, who eventually blocked out all memories of Vecna as a form of trauma response. He continued to experiment on her for 4 years before an incident caused her to accidentally open another portal on November 6, 1983. This time, she opened the Mother Gate to the Upside Down, which led to a Demogorgon crossing into the human world, and boom, we are caught up with Season 1 and the vanishing of Will Byers, the point of this entire retcon being Vecna was behind all of it this entire time. He's always been the big bad, we just didn't know it yet. Okay, like I said, I get why they did this. I don't love it, but I get it. I personally love the idea of the Upside Down being this unexplained alternate dimension that is beyond human comprehension. But no, it turns out the Upside Down was accidentally created by 11, and Vecna created the Mind Flayer. I see the vision, but there are a lot of flaws in it. A lot of it is very foggy, and it turns out that even behind the scenes, the people working on the show don't really agree on what the Upside Down is. The production designer, Chris Chirillo, claims the Upside Down was created by 11 the moment she opened the gate, and that's why the Upside Down is frozen in time at the date of November 6, 1983, at the exact moment she created it. But Millie Bobby Brown claims the alternate dimension wasn't created, it was always there. 11 just opened the first portal to it. And it's also unclear if Dimension X was turned into the Upside Down and mirrored Hawkins, freezing it on November 6th, or if the Upside Down is a completely different dimension that was created right then and there. The other thing that makes me feel a little iffy about it is that when he first appeared, I thought the idea behind Vecna was really cool because I assumed he was going to be number 1, but that he somehow found himself stuck in the Upside Down and somehow managed to team up with the Mind Flayer to get his revenge. I thought they were about to introduce a very interesting dynamic between a person and the higher being from another dimension, almost like a deal with the devil kind of vibe. But then, no. The twist of the season is that Vecna is the Mind Flayer. He created it. He's been controlling everything since the very beginning of the show. Every living thing in the Upside Down is him. He is the hive mind. And I can't even begin to explain how that makes no sense with the events of the show. And normally, I would not give a fuck about any of this, because like I said, I can accept you having a mystifying alternate dimension that isn't explained for mystery purposes like in Season 1. I love that. that's fire. But if you're gonna be so hellbent on over-explaining everything about it, I'm gonna be a nitpicky asshole if you don't make any sense with your explanations. The lore of the show just gets really inconsistent and it bugs me a lot. You can tell they're just sort of making shit up as they go, and for the most part, they do it sort of well. As long as you don't really stop to think about it, because if you do, the logic of the show falls apart immediately. Season 4 has characters spending an extended amount of time in the Upside Down, and yet they never at any point encounter any Demogorgon or even Demodogs. There's only bats in the Upside Down for some reason now, and they're also fine to just stay in the Upside Down for long periods of time, which makes no sense to me because in Season 1, Dr. Brenner says the Upside Down has toxic air, an idea that seems to have been completely abandoned. Hopper even had to wear a hazmat suit to go in Season 1. I will say, there is something fun about the characters learning to figure out ways to use portals to the Upside Down in their advantage. I love those shots when they go from one realm to another and it's literally upside down. This shit is fun, but it's still inconsistent. The USSR having a Demogorgon doesn't even make sense anymore. This Demogorgon is sort of like the first one from Season 1, just a sort of feral beast that kills, but we learn later on that every upside down creature share one consciousness, a hive mind, aka the Mind Flayer, and we find out that Vecna is the Mind Flayer. Every Demogorgon is him. So why the fuck is Vecna just staying in Russia? Is this Demogorgon controlled by Vecna? Did it recognize Hopper and Joyce? Why is it not fleeing? And it's really confusing because Season 2 also teaches us that the Demogorgons can have a sort of conscience. In Season 2, Dustin unknowingly raises a baby Demogorgon he names Dart that eventually turns into a Demodog that attacks the gang. But later in the season, the gang is about to get killed by a Demodog until it recognizes Dustin and chooses not to kill him. So, was that Vecna? Does Vecna have a bond with Dustin that makes him not kill him? Or can the Demogorgons have separate identities that aren't part of the hive mind? And you can't tell me the connection doesn't work because it's too far, because Season 3 also makes it clear that the portals work like a Wi-Fi network. If they close the portals, the connection to the hive mind is severed and the creatures just drop dead. So which is it? Also, in Season 2, we learned that there were other numbered kids like 11, and we learned that some of them are out there living their lives. Except out of this idea was born the worst episode of the show that everybody fucking hates, so Season 4 retcons that thread and now claims that Vecna exterminated all of the numbered kids except for 11, who turned into a Super Saiyan and sent him into another dimension. Those inconsistencies are the byproduct of this increasingly annoying need the show has to over-explain everything. The show is so concerned with making everything connected that it forgets to make sense in the process, and that's their own damn fault. They didn't need to do all this. Also, why did Vecna randomly decide to give fucking Nancy a vision of his entire life story? What purpose does that serve to him? Why Nancy? She's not very close to 11. He has no link to her whatsoever. So why? That was really random. Is it because that's gonna play out in any important way? Or is it just because the writers couldn't find another way to give us exposition? Okay, I feel like I've made my point. I could keep nitpicking this shit forever, and believe me, there is more. But I'm gonna move on. I know it doesn't sound like it, but I liked the Hawkins storyline. I liked Vecna. I liked Lucas's struggle with the jocks, and I liked every single thing that had to do with Max this season. Thank fucking God she's here. She's fully become the saving grace of this show. What else? What else is there about this season? Oh yeah, the Russia storyline. Basically, Season 4 has a very solid idea of what it wants to do in Hawkins, but it's also very aware that it has way too many characters and that it needs to find something for everybody to do. So we have to come up with other stories to fill the gap. So Joyce and Murray go to Russia to save Hopper. Keep in mind, that plot has absolutely nothing to do with the Upside Down. They don't know there's Demogorgons in Russia. That's a complete coincidence. They're just going on an action movie rescue mission to Russia. But the concept of the story is too short to make it through the whole season, so we have to invent some shit to slow the pace of that storyline down. So let's introduce more characters. because the pacing wasn't already all over the place. And we get Yuri, an unbearably annoying character that feels more like a Looney Tunes kid than anything else.
Oh, you just expect to knock. Oh, hello, let me in. I'm friendly American with a big beard.
And then Enzo, because the show needs another badass action hero in the mix for some reason. I actually like Enzo. I think the guy who plays him is really fucking cool, but sorry, dude. You're kind of joining an already crowded party. Look, the Russia storyline is bad. It's atrocious. I fucking hate it. I don't think it has any redeeming qualities. I don't give a shit about Hopper anymore. He hasn't been Hopper since season 2. I'm not invested in his romance with Joyce. It feels forced and unnecessary. Murray can die for all I care. But he won't because this is Stranger Things. And those two Russian guys are putting me to sleep. There's nothing for me in this story. This is easily the worst part of the season and I can't stand it. The road trip storyline is a snooze fest. This is really just a storyline that features all the characters the writers are not interested in developing whatsoever. It is brutal how empty this storyline feels. Mike spends the entire season just looking confused. He has no personality anymore, and it's not helped by the fact that Finn Wolfhard seems like he really doesn't want to be there. Will is so sidelined in season 4 that it is kind of funny. The Duffer Brothers claim he's gonna be the main character of season 5, so I guess we'll see. But dude, at this point, pull a Bran Stark and make him sit the season out. He was so fucking useless. I already talked about Jonathan, and no, by the way, I do not like Argyle. If you've been paying attention, I tend to be very annoyed with Stranger Things characters that have no other purpose than being a constant joke. I found Argyle insufferable. I'm sorry. 11 going on a side quest to get her powers back is whatever. I feel pretty indifferent about it. It had to happen one way or another, so sure. The end of the season is pretty thrilling. The whole final act inside of Vecna's old house in both worlds was very fun. Lucas going head to head with Jason because Jason thinks he is part of the Satanists was cool. R.I.P. Jason, by the way. My guy got his shit rocked. And oh, it looks like Vecna is going to actually kill Max. But no, that's another fake out because 11 pulls a Rey Skywalker out of nowhere and she uses the Force to just bring her back to life. Okay. I initially thought 11 was gonna die as a result of saving Max, like essentially using her powers to exchange her life for Max's, but no, she can just do that now. She can just resurrect people. That's the new staple of Stranger Things. At the end of every season, a main character dies, except not really, because the stakes weren't low enough, I guess. Anyway, I'm done with this shit. Look, I love Stranger Things, man. I really do. This show was a revelation to me when it first came out, and to echo what I said at the beginning of the video, I'm torn. Because while I love this show, I hate what success has done to it. And this 4th season is the peak of that confusion for me. I really tried with Stranger Things 4, and I just cannot understand why people think this is the greatest fucking season of TV ever made. I just don't get it. It's not even that bad, and I enjoy parts of it, but this show was just turned into this weird thing, and I don't know what to think of it anymore. My love for this show is an eternal conflict with my hatred of its current state, and I really struggle to reconcile those two feelings. It's a very strange position. At the time this video comes out, we are about a year from the final season of Stranger Things. Despite my feelings about the last 2 seasons, I am curious to know how the series is gonna end. I want to see where these characters are gonna go. I'm too attached to this show to not finish it. Do I trust that they're gonna stick the landing? I don't know, man. I'd like to believe that the Duffer Brothers are gonna go Super Saiyan with the final season and just write something absolutely wonderful, and the takeaway is just gonna be that there was a portion in the middle where they just didn't really know what to do, but I'm not that optimistic. I'm always going to be a season 1 purist because I do believe it is one of the best seasons of TV ever made, but that doesn't mean I reject everything that came after it. Like I said, Max is one of my favorite characters in Stranger Things, and if the show had ended in season 1, she would have never existed. So there is some positive to get out of it. It's not all bad. If anything, this show is a great lesson on the importance of allowing stories to end. I feel like this has been a complaint about Hollywood practices for a while now. Just because a story is great doesn't mean it needs to continue. Not everything needs a sequel, not every show needs more seasons. Sometimes a great story is just that, a great story, and it's not meant to be touched. Regardless of my issues with it, I still think Stranger Things is a special show. It means a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to a lot of people. And I might have been talking shit for a couple hours, but I do believe that it's gonna be a while before another show like this comes along. I love this cast, I love this universe, and I have no doubt that we're gonna get a bunch of spin-offs once the main series is over, so it's not gonna be that long of a wait before we re-explore this world. But this OG series is always gonna have a special place in my heart. I'm very hard on it, but it's because I love it and I just really want it to be good. Maybe it's unfair to hold it to the standard of season 1 because that season put the bar very high. It's tough to have that level of good storytelling expected from you every time, but maybe that's why it should have ended in season 1. I don't really know what to expect from Stranger Things 5, but I will be seated when it comes out, that's for sure. I will probably make a video about it. I feel like after making this whole thing, I'm gonna have to talk about the final season, which I am excited for. I just really needed to get my thoughts out on the first 4 seasons because it's been spinning around in my head for years now. So, I guess I'll meet you back here for season 5. If we're lucky, Marie dies in episode 1.
Show's over.